This is a regularly scheduled joint meeting of the Fort Myers Beach Town Council and the Fort Myers Beach Local Planning Agency. It is November 13th, 2024. It's 8:30 a.m. And if you would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yeah, we should ask him. Don, do you stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance when we do it? We're just wondering. Dan's wondering. He usually does.
I figured he would.
So, yes, I certainly will. Could we have a roll call, John? Can we start with you?
John R. King, council member.
Jim Dunlap, LPA.
Doug Ekman, LPA.
Jim Anderhold, Council.
Flashback.
Jane Plummer, LPA.
Dan Allers, Council.
Anita Saracita, LPA.
Karen Woodson, Council.
Jim Bowen, LPA.
Scott Safford, Council. John McLean, LPA.
And Don?
Don Suddeth, LPA.
Okay. And could we have a motion, please, to accept Don Sutton?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. You want me to keep going?
Go ahead,
Okay.
you're on a roll.
All right, so we appreciate, the LPA appreciates the fact that we have this meeting. Thank you, Andy and Frankie, for being here, the staff members for being here. Thank you all so much. And, as the LPA has been hearing the cases, obviously, before you guys get them, there have been several times where we've said, we just want to be on the same page. And as we have talked many times about predictability for folks looking to invest in our island, for people even rebuilding their homes, and security for the residents and knowing what direction we're going and what we're actually thinking. So probably the biggest topic of conversation has occurred over the idea of public benefit, what that means, what it means to you, what it means to us. Even in our discussion, there were differing ideas, and it was a very good discussion. But Dan, if you don't mind, both Jim Bowen and Jim Dunlap did a lot of work on the 4-hour work session on that, and I'm wondering if you would mind if I turned it over to one Jim and the other to start the conversation.
No, actually, that was going to be my recommendation.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you. I'll start off. That's okay, Jim?
Sure.
As I get to watch from a distance for quite a while and see the angst that is around when people are trying to do the right thing, they're growing into the moment that they want to be aligned with the town. They want to be good neighbors, good partners, long-term investors. You could see the confusion they were trying to sort out in their minds about how do I make my best case without it looking like a case for me. And the town was indicating that almost to the term, and I know this won't stay long-term, but the term of trade-offs is the way that statistical people and mathematical people think about this. And it's much, much more sincere, authentic, and deliberate and purposeful than that. And therefore, the guidance that we need to give, in my mind, was guardrails versus prescriptive lanes, prescriptive this, then that, whatever. So I took a stab, both in my LPA application and then with Anita's group, to say, I wonder if we could do an outline, because my belief and my history is that if you want to get somebody's opinion, give them yours. And all of a sudden, you get a lot of feedback. And I don't mind doing that because I have rationale and perspective around why I do what I do, and I think those conversations are healthy and very productive. So my thought process was to organize my approach in 3 ways. With the understanding that I don't think this is something that staff should be required to be involved in, other than a point I'll talk about here in a minute, because their role of trying to guess, and I heard the council talk about this during your little debate on this, about what 3 of you out of 5 of you may want. It isn't fair, it isn't productive, and they frankly don't set policy, and they don't set degrees of capabilities of the applicants to offset variances and other things they're asking for. They go by the book. They should go by the book. We depend on Retalis to not get in trouble and to stay in those lanes. And I think this one was just a bridge too far. So when I wrote my document, it was to keep in mind where staff would be involved or not, and that starts at the beginning of my document. I believe, as most things in life, and you will go through this with your strategic plan, there's got to be a set of guiding principles that generally we agree on are the ability to knock at the door and get it answered. And those should be fairly broad, but also fairly clear. And you can see the three that I put down to start the document, which I think everybody has said in one way, shape, or form, that if it's going to be a public benefit, it ought to be a public benefit, accessible to or benefit of all. The other thing is, it's not a moment in time, it's not a trade-off, it's not a condition of, it's a commitment you make on behalf of the town and the respect you have for our needs and the investment that you're about to make and the willingness you want the town to do to support the alternatives to what you would normally be doing without this trade-off, if you will. And that's why I think it needed to be unique. And as we talked about many times, the island being 7 miles long may as well be 70 miles long. There's many, many, many little individual communities throughout the island that need and have different needs, need to be addressed. And the more local you can make it, the more authentic and sincere it becomes. So I put unique in its nature or physical location, something special that we wouldn't have but for this particular applicant coming in. And there may be a moment in time where a physical location needs something that others don't. We can all talk about that. And the last thing was long-term or perpetual. And those are different things, I think. Long-term commitments can be financial over a 10-year period of time where they're underwriting a particular activity of the town. There's lots of ideas around that. Perpetual is all the things you would think it would be, which is to donate or provide or deed to, and all the things that are in my document. That's where I think staff's role is, to say, did they come through the door? Did they knock the right way? Did we get it answered, and could they meet these questions? And if that's the case, in my mind, we can then allow them to come in and make the bigger case for what they think they have to offer the town in the form of public benefit. I'll breeze through the next two categories real quickly. I then tried to put some meat on the bones around categories. These are completely of my selection. There isn't anything that's hardwired or hard fast in here, other than I think people think in categories. And when I study, I organize my thoughts around different buckets, and therefore I can repeat in those categories or nicely compare other like kind offers within similar categories. So you see those that I have in the document. And then it gets down to a little bit of what you heard us talk about, I think, with Neptune yesterday, and I think Seagate for sure. And that is, so how big is this? And how do you describe how big it is? And what sort of an impact does it have? And I include in that, because of my background, what's the financial impact to the town? That should be granular, it should be perpetual, and it's also, in my mind, projectable. This isn't a mystery around the people that are going to work there, the impact fees they're going to pay, the taxes, all the categories we talk about. And there are also like values, meaning that if they're going to donate pieces of property, parks, parking, et cetera, the math around that can be fairly well figured out. And therefore, the financial impact, again, in my mind, should be commensurate with the amount of degree of exceptions and alternatives they're asking us to have. I think that's, and I should close with this, that in particular is the responsibility of the applicant to create their compelling case, present to us, and passionately represent why they believe this has the impact on the town that they're representing it does. Obviously, and I tiered those because some of the smaller projects, in my mind, in and of themselves, and I believe financial blight and the removal of is a public benefit too. So by fixing something small and getting back on the tax rolls and hiring people and providing service to the community, that's a public benefit in my mind and should be seen that. That's why I did the two tiers. It's not going to have the impact of some of the larger ones because they can't, but it's just important in aggregate to have as many of those as we could. That's the thought around my document. That was the starting point for the LPA conversation. And I'll let Jim add his components to it, which were very complementary in my mind to what we went through. And I'll close with one final thing. We further granularized special benefit versus public benefit, which I think was a marvelous example of how teamwork creates something more appropriate for the moment. And not all public benefits have equal value, even when there's not a financial impact to it. And I think the LPA took a good stab at that and created something semantically at this point that makes some sense. So with that, I'll stop.
Jim?
I guess my approach was within the guardrails that Jim mentioned, and that was, as we analyze these projects, And there are requests for height, density, increased FAR, whatever the request for a deviation is, would fall between a public benefit, a special benefit, and an amenity. And that, as you slide in there, a public benefit would be perpetual in nature, it would be special, it would be something very unique. A special benefit would be something that both the developer and the town benefit from. And so it's sort of middle of the road. An amenity then would be just something that would be nice to have. Doesn't necessarily carry any weight financially, but it would be something that we would like to see in our community. So how do we apply that sliding scale between those guardrails? And I think that's the direction that I was hoping that council would give us today is, you know, what is more important or what slides towards a public benefit from a special benefit? And as Jim said, it is sort of unique based on where you are in the island. So I know that there's some feeling that a restaurant is special if it's on the south end, but may not be as special as it is up here. And I think we did at our meeting, there was a consensus that these are policy decisions, and therefore the staff should be given some direction because they're going in blind, and you know, they shouldn't necessarily be negotiating with a developer on what is a public benefit. But I think one keynote part of it is that I think we had a strong feeling public benefit needed to be perpetual in nature.
And if I could just give you some examples. So, a special benefit is the pool at Margaritaville. It is special because it's part of the development, the developer enjoys the benefits of that, but the public has access to it for a price, for a cost, they can still participate in it, it's a special benefit. The amenity, an amenity is obvious, it's the restaurant at Seagate, it's the restaurants that are proposed here and there. And a public benefit, yesterday, we're in public, so we'll talk about it. A public benefit, clearly yesterday, in the case of the Neptune, the public benefit, and they did an excellent job of outlining that economic element, which nobody had done before. But a public benefit was in fact the parking space and the open space on Delmar. There is financial benefit to the town, it's in perpetuity, it's access, it was very clearly a public benefit. And so at least having those categories and outlining this, as both of the gyms have done, gave us a clearer way to think about it and took away a bit of the subjective nature of, what is this, how is this? The unique element that both Jim D and Jim B have talked about adds to the nature and the character of the different areas of the island. So, a unique benefit to the south end of the island clearly is a restaurant, or maybe it's replacing the tiki bar at the Outrigger, or whatever. That's a unique benefit for that area that part of the community wants. So, that's kind of where we were. I will have to tell you that I discounted tremendously the financial element. It's only because I don't think that way. I mean, I'm a business person, but I do not think that way. And yet, yesterday, and Frankie, you were really helpful adding that you gave Patrick a little note about the parking and what revenue that would contribute to the town. And especially when you think, though, Dan, you have done a yeoman's job of getting us money and helping us kind of move through these hurricanes and whatnot. The whole town has, the town council has. But at some point in time that ends and we have to stand on our own 2 feet. And how do we do that? And so this was a real light bulb to me. And I appreciated that conversation so much because I discounted it. I just went, okay, the financial, what we really need to think about is the policy. Well, what we really need to do is be grown-ups and live in the real world. And the real world is, how are we gonna pay for our house, which is the town of Fort Myers Beach? How are we gonna manage that? And, anyway, so I feel like we made a stab at it. But what we really want to do is hear from you guys about how you want to move forward with this. I think another critical element was not to put Sarah and Judith and Jason and everybody else in community development in that position of trying to decipher what that policy decision is that the council will make as to what public benefit is. And then just one last item that was, I've heard a couple of people say, how do we create a formula? You get another foot of height for a parking space. I don't think that is part, well, it certainly wasn't part of what we talked about. This is more of a general discussion and a general policy, because it's going to be different on every project we look at and every situation that we have. And I'll just tell you, Don Sudduth also was a big contributor to that conversation. I don't know if he has anything to add to what Jim and Jim have contributed here today. Do you, Don?
No, I'm thinking about changing my name to Jim.
Yeah, you definitely should.
No, nothing to add. They did a great job. They conveyed my thoughts as well. Thank you.
You know, Madam Chair, I think you guys did an excellent job of I think, capsulizing what has been discussed over the last 2 years on what constitutes a public benefit. Especially, I like how you broke it out. Where I've always struggled is when you look at a public benefit, how does it relate to, as I believe it was Jim, you guys have said, is when you're talking about intensity, density, and height. Which one, when you consider public benefit, a public benefit when you're looking at height, does adding a height story, 2, 3 stories, or whatever to a building, does it have an adverse effect on the entire island as a whole? Does density, if you're double or tripling your density, does that have an adverse effect on the quality of life for the residents that live here? So I'm trying to figure out how we can use those 3 big buckets, whether it's height, density, and intensity, and how can you relate that to a public benefit? Because to me, if you're double, tripling density, you're creating more of a detriment to the quality of life for the island people and the visitors than someone that may be adding a story or 2. So how do you relate public benefit to that? So if I get 3 stories, just use an example, you get 3 stories and you have to provide a public park, we'll say. Is it the same public benefit as doubling or tripling density and providing a park? Am I making sense? So because you're adding to the infrastructure issues, you're adding to the traffic problems that is our #1 complaint we all get. So is it possible to somehow link in the intensity? If you're massing something and you're adding the density to that, but you're staying at, we'll just use the 3 stories above flood, even though you're staying within the height restrictions, because you're increasing everything, it's still a detriment to the quality of life. And how does that public benefit relate? And is it equal? I don't know that, in my opinion, I don't know that it would be equal.
So you say it's a detriment, but every small business owner wants more density because there's going to be more people and you're going to be keeping money on the island. So I don't know. I that's a dangerous word, saying it's a detriment that when you add density. If you're saying that, then if you have a project that by right they could build 300 something units and they're only going to put half that in, then that, in the way you're saying that should be a super duper benefit, right?
Well, again, I think, Scott, if you took your small business hat off and put the resident hat on, you
absolutely.
would have a different view of that, right?
Right.
I'm a small business owner too, so
But-
obviously more people on the island means my business is going to do better. But if I can't, if my business, if we'll just use mine as example,
Right.
if you can't go anywhere on the island,
Absolutely. So
Right.
then if that's your argument, then, but if somebody comes in, just wants height and is actually decreasing their allowable density, that to you should be a super duper benefit.
I didn't say a super duper. I said it should be. Do I think it's a benefit by
Yeah.
decreasing density? Absolutely.
Okay.
Because is there anyone up here that hasn't gotten the same emails that I've gotten, that traffic is the #1 concern?
Absolutely.
And always has been? Is it safe to say that increasing density increases traffic?
Right, so if you have a project that actually that decreases the possible density, then I think they should be rewarded.
Well,
Dan, can I say something? It is gonna shock you.
okay.
You ready?
I don't think anything shocks me.
You know, Patrick said something yesterday, and I agree with him. I don't know how you draw a line between density and traffic,
Correlation.
a correlation.
Yeah.
So, my family came here in 1972. And I was in high school from 1976 to 1979. In 1976, on Fort Myers Beach, it could take you 3 hours to travel Estero Boulevard.
There you
Now
go.
just think county-wide, how many people were here in 1976 versus how many people, and I'm gonna say we're here in 2022, because there's been a little bit of an exodus.
Yeah.
But even, let's just talk about that exodus as of today. There are less people, less condo dwellers, less tourists, less everything on Fort Myers Beach right now. And yesterday, when I left the LPA meeting, it took me 48 minutes to get off the island from here.
Sure.
So I don't know, you know,
But we don't have any cut-through issue at all.
of course we do, but we also, what, I don't know that we can continue to link those two things together because of the nature of our community, and I just don't know that I don't know that it's real. I don't know that it's real. It always has been, we've always talked that way, but in the reality of it, last night I was thinking about it, and I was just thinking about what my life looked like as a 16-year-old with a new driver's license in my 1964 Thunderbird, driving down Fort Myers Beach, and it was like it is now. It was like it is
And
now.
I think that's a fair argument, but then if you're gonna do that, then you gotta relate it across the board. So if I had a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom cottage, and now I've built back a 4-bedroom, 4-bath house in the same rental pool, that's not gonna have any impact on the infrastructure, cause we've always had
Well,
infrastructure problems?
Sure, no, I think.
I mean, that's the
but-
same argument, if you're gonna use traffic and density, then you gotta use that same argument with intensity and infrastructure.
I think we need to separate traffic
Fair
from the impact on infrastructure of water, sewer, public safety, and the whatnot. I think we need to, because the traffic issue of Fort Myers Beach is just, it's just an anomaly. I don't think it makes sense to anybody. And when I read traffic reports from developers that come forward to us, to be truthful, I pass right over them because they all say the same. They all say the same thing, and they have for 30 years. They have for 30 years. So I'm sorry that, I just wanted to throw that at you.
No, and my intent is not to, maybe I worded it wrong when I said detriment. Does one have more of an impact on the island than the other? In my mind, I think it does. I think
That's
density
fair.
does
That's
over,
fair.
That's fair,
over
that's a
height.
fair statement.
And if someone's coming in and asking for height and density and intensity, how do you relate that to, and I think maybe that's where you were going, Jim,
It
with
is.
the tiers,
It is.
right?
Totally. That's exactly it.
But, you know, the whole purpose of these development agreements was to, how do we allow projects to get going, right? And when you look at, as we talked about at the last MVP meeting, when you're looking at a small development versus a larger development, if a smaller development, we'll just use one that's already been approved. The Meyer side, they had an increase in height. They had a massive increase in intensity and density. They then technically should have been in the higher tier.
That's right.
But they don't have the ability to meet that higher tier. So therefore, their project is dead on arrival based on what was discussed with the tiers, right? But it wasn't. And I guess that's what we're trying to, that's where I'm trying to figure out, how can you relate? If you're asking for the trifecta, but you don't have the ability because you're a small business or you're a small parcel of land to meet what we're potentially talking about doing, how do you balance that?
But I think, using Meyer site for an example, and I don't have the history you guys do, so the thought process I have around a site like that, that's asking for that trifecta of deviations, we don't want to limit creativity of what they're willing to step up, offer, invest in, provide for, all the things that have nothing to do with their physical location, site, or service they offer, but the other opportunities they have by being a viable economic participant in our island, we want some of that shared. And to find a way to come make a compelling argument that I can't do it on my site, yet I need all these things to make the model work, then if the model's going to work for you, make the model work for us too, and you bring those recommendations to us and make a compelling argument. I think the flexibility that we're trying to create is to not box ourselves into, if they can't there, then they shouldn't at all. That is absolutely not right. So many other needs we have that can be financial, volunteer participation, other type of things, expertise, they're all in there, that they should be compelled to represent independently of our stimulation, other than say we expect to have the conversation.
If I could, one thing that I heard yesterday, which I think there's actually two parts. One thing that we talked about just as the LPA was that the criteria would be the same whether it was a development agreement or a CPD. So we didn't want to have a distinction between those as far as special or public benefit or amenity. We felt like they were the same. It was just two different paths that a developer could go down. One issue, very separate from everything that we've been talking about, but I wanted it clear. But the second one was actually the way that they approached us yesterday, Patrick specifically, when he talked about the basket of benefits. And he was very understanding that some people would view his contribution to the Del Mar access as view corridor or not. It's town right of way, most of it, but it's enhanced by what they're willing to do. And he recognized that maybe that wouldn't have the same value as bringing his own view corridor, yet it is something that is an enhancement and a benefit to the town. And then we go back to the creativity, and he actually, the list of benefits that they put in the package, they came forward and said, we understand you'd like to see commitments of what we will step up to. Here's a supplement to it, and it included things that we haven't heard since Margaritaville, like a discount for residents for goods and services there. That wasn't part of their package, probably should have been. But my point is, really, he was recognizing, and I think what we should maybe do is ensure that staff can say, there are these public benefits, there are these special benefits, there are these amenities or what have you, maybe they don't even talk about those, but here are the different classes that they're doing, and then bring it to LPA and council to say, and the overall package, as opposed to view corridor for height, which is kind of the way it's been approached up until now, mostly because it's written that way in our code, right?
Just a little note.
But we all know that essential services is an important thing on this island, and that's not something that's addressed so my main point around this is that while not every project will have the land mass to be able to provide certain benefits, they could all be creative and provide spot benefits that may be really helpful depending on where they are in their unique nature of the project.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that, trying to quantify, in our package, there's other towns, other jurisdictions that actually have a point scale. I think we should all agree that that's just not gonna fly here. The delta of where the project is, what part of the island is on the beach, is on the back bay, it's just, you're never going to be able to figure out what that delta is and quantify it. I just, as Jim said, I think you're just boxing yourself in. So if we can just agree to, hey, there's just it's not gonna happen here. I think we can move forward.
I agree with you, Scott, and I think, right after the hurricane on the LPA, we talked a lot about Sea Gypsy and what the limitations on that property would be, and how could a property like that compete with a property like the Neptune, for example, or anything else for that matter. And I agree, I don't know how we come up with a formula. However, as this whole notion of public benefits has sort of expanded in categories, and the Neptune did an excellent job of it yesterday. They really did an excellent job of their presentation. But it isn't just about the property that we're talking about. It's about the school, it's about the fire district, it's about the sidewalks, it's about stormwater, it's about all the things that this community needs to thrive. And how does that project contribute to that overall thriving of Fort Myers Beach?
Yeah, I think one of the, I hadn't had a chance to watch the meeting from yesterday yet, but I think
It
one
was
of the.
good.
Well, I'm sure I'll watch it at some point either the next day or two, but, you know, you use Margaritaville as an example. You look at that parking lot. To me, that's a perpetual,
They're right.
tangible,
Bingo.
Absolutely.
economic stimulus year after year that we didn't have before, that can be used for the basket that you're saying. To me, those are, I wouldn't use super duper or whatever word you use, Scott, but I mean, but that is a true tangible public benefit that long after we're all gone and the next generation is here, that will still be there that they can benefit from. So seeing things like that, I think that's creative thinking. I think that gives something back to the town that really truly has an economic impact. Numbers can be numbers. You can make numbers any way you want, for or against. But that is a number that you can really look at year after year and say, we know this parking lot is gonna generate this much money. We just know it based on averages, and the numbers don't lie. So to me, that's more important than a park that somebody may or may not use. You know, a linear park that the town that does not own, that people may or may not use because it goes through a development.
So let me ask
I
you
don't know
this,
that-
instead of a park, would one consider a beach bar more important? Because there are a lot of people that love Fort Myers Beach because it had the beach bar, it had the outrigger, it had, you know, it had places that actually created memories.
Yeah,
And
I've tried to say it for as long as anybody's been listening, that Fort Myers Beach, as long as I've been paying attention, and from people that I've talked to that have been here for decades, it's always been an inclusive island. So a public benefit is, how do you preserve that vision of what the island has been for decades?
now do you,
And make
so
it
do you look
inclusive.
at a beach bar, let me ask you this, Madam Chair, would you look at a beach bar as public benefit, a special benefit, or amenity, or does it depend?
I look at it as an amenity.
Okay.
I look at it as an amenity because it is something that people are, I mean, let's just say you're not a drinker.
Right.
Uh,
But you can hit, but you don't necessarily have to drink. You
No,
can
true.
put your toes in the
Just
sand. And,
Absolutely, absolutely. I still look at it as an amenity, and I think that was the consensus from us as we discussed it.
Okay.
Bars, restaurants, those things. It's an amenity that, Don, are you trying to chirp in?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. No, please. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the developer gets, or the property owner gets a benefit of those, right? I mean, they're gonna put beach bars and they're gonna put restaurants in because there's an economic benefit to them. It makes their deal, or it makes their project more viable. So, I'm not saying it's not an intangible, as Anita mentioned, an amenity. And certainly we all want those things, drinkers or not. I mean, we still, you know, love to sit and listen to music and, you know, have one beer versus 17 or something, but the point is, I think that the developer's gonna try to put those in, for their economic benefit as well. So I just don't know, I think the big, kind of the elephant in the room for me is, well, what are we willing to give for that, right? Like how much will you sort of sell the soul of Fort Myers Beach, right, to get something like that? And that's probably the biggest question for me is, you know, you're right, like the parking lot at Margaritaville, things like that are in perpetuity. Like, I think they ought to be an expectation, not a, hey, I'm giving you this, so can I get another, you know, 10 stories? Or, you know, this is my project, this is where it works. Everybody knows we have every development has a break point or a line. And I think generally speaking, for the vibe of Fort Myers Beach, people should be looking for that. And if that happens to be 10 stories or 12 or 6, I mean, we've got to find that and figure it out. But I mean, there's certain degrees that a development can prosper from without, you know, maybe without the extremes.
Don,
Anyway, that is.
Don, the thing I would add to your amenity description, and it's the distinction with the difference for me, is it's an amenity for the developer, no doubt, no challenge. Where they connect in the presentation is, and it's open to all. It's now available as part of the neighborhood, and that needs to happen if they want credit or include in the criteria that we're doing something inclusive. So I just want to put that on
That's my
top.
point on the one project, Seagate, you know, the charging a membership
Right.
fee or giving access to a certain number of people, certain select people who can afford that, is not a, public benefit. In fact, I don't even think it's an amenity to some extent, so.
It's a club.
Right.
Yep, yep, agreed, agreed. So, the elephant in the room is, you all have probably read David's, Lee's, email outlining, they did a poll, and what is the tolerance of the people who actually, and I thought that it was a really good layout of what would people tolerate? What do people think about it? When we said early on that we were gonna abide by the comp plan and the land development code, and that was it, and that was it. And so I think the expectation of people on Fort Myers Beach was, we're gonna still be a little small town. But the reality of it is we are not. That's the reality. And though I may go down kicking and dragging and screaming about that, we're not going to be. We're just not going to be. So, what are we willing to tolerate? And I think aside from what we're willing to tolerate, I think it's also going to be very important for us to vocalize to our community that this is not widespread. That because we approved, or because you all are in step one of approving Seagate, so let's say that it gets approved, that doesn't mean that everywhere on Fort Myers Beach there are going to be 17-story buildings. It just does not mean that. But I think that at some point in time, whether it's through your strategic plan or whatever, I have another idea that it's, is interesting that I want to talk about outside of here. I think that we need to go about identifying what we expect this community to look like. What do we think it's going to look like? And, Dan, if you remember months and months ago, remember that big map I had up on the wall? And I had Dan over to dinner, and we were talking about, what will happen on this island? Where do you identify things changing? And it isn't a whole lot. It's enough to impact what Fort Myers Beach looks like or will look like 5-10 years from now, but it's not enough to change the soul of our community. And I think that's really important for people to know and for us to talk about.
And I think, Anita, to your point, I think it's pretty spelled out in the comp plan already, as far as if you look at the downtown district, the Red Coconut Village, Santini, and I think there's one other one in there. It actually talks about the potential to increase height based on just those zones, because they're in an area that has enough size land or is in a downtown district that it could be expected based on public benefit giveback. So that already spells it out, whether you want to call them nodes or special zones. So, I mean, that's there. I think, to your point, because we're talking about Seagate, if Seagate was being proposed next to 7-Eleven or next to
Where the Baptist church
where the
is.
it wouldn't even have got past
Right.
town staff, right? So the fact that it was within the zone that the comp plan and land development code say, well, we can look at giving potential height increases because you're in this zone. It doesn't specify, and I'm not a fan of specifying what is our tolerance. I think our tolerance should be driven by public input, what they're asking for and what they're giving. And I think that process works. And that is what we all voted on. We all voted on following that process. And if we continue to do that, I think it's very dangerous to say what we could tolerate. What we're seeing is the residents and the public are telling us what they could tolerate. You've seen a shift from right after the storm of absolutely nothing over 2 stories or 3 stories to people now saying, well, we could tolerate it if this, right? I think if you start saying in a forum like this that we could tolerate 6 or 10, that's going to be now the starting point.
No, but I mean, when
In
I
certain
said,
districts.
yes, when I said tolerate, I mean exactly what you're saying, that we are going to tolerate some changes to our island. We're going to look at these projects with an open mind and with some flexibility. We're going to do that.
Well, and I think you've already seen it in some of the projects that
Sure.
are, whether it be the Whale, whether it be Myerside, whether it be your approval yesterday of what was proposed. You're seeing that there's a willingness for people to look at things outside of whatever is in the confines of that based on where it's at. But I think this discussion is more around how do you determine exactly what is a basis point? I think Jim has used that word several times. What is a basis point of what is expected? If you're going to come in and ask for something out, what is expected before you even walk through the door? Now, it should be up to the developer to decipher what we come out of this meeting with today, to say, I think I can provide that, or I think I can provide that, or I think I can provide that. And this is how, and then let them make their pitch, let them make their case. And depending on who's sitting up at the dais at that time, whether it's the LPA or the council, we'll then weigh that in based on their location, what they're asking for. I don't think the people of the island are unrealistic. I think that they understand. You are gonna have some that are, draw a hard line in the sand and everything, and you're gonna have some that say, let them build everything. It's the 75% that are in the middle of that I think that you have to try to do the best you can to make policy on. And I think we've got a good start here. I just don't know how we drill it down to add to it. To me, I think a thing that we should be looking at with what we've dealt with over the last 2 years is resiliency. I think a public benefit is how do you come to the table with resiliency? And I know people get tired of hearing me say the coastal construction wall, but call it an armor wall, call it whatever you want. On my way back yesterday, I purposely stopped for a day at Clearwater to just walk and see what that thing looked like and talk to some of the public works people, and you wouldn't even know what it is.
Right.
It's a 15-foot wide, curvy wall that goes way down into the ground. It's anchored back, and if you look at it, and when you wouldn't even tell that they had a hurricane. You wouldn't even tell. A little bit of sand that they cleaned up, and a couple of pieces that it broke off, but something like that, is that something that if a developer came in and said, hey, we'll do our section, we know that maybe we're looking at trying to do something in the areas that are hardest hit, we'll include that in our plan.
Super duper benefit.
You know what I mean?
Super duper
That
benefit.
one is.
Something that'll,
Yeah,
that's a
I
protection.
agree with that. I think the other thing, I think we're starting to realize this, but take, I hate to use my hotel as an example all the time, but, so we had a very big courtyard where all our guests spent time, where either laid out or sat in the shade or just visited. Now, when we're looking at rebuilding, all of a sudden that space is gone. That will now be parking. So where do I put those people? The only logical place is
Yep.
another floor on top. So I think we have to realize that the days of the open courtyard are gone.
That's right.
So we need to be a little bit lenient to let these guys at least have another area or floor. One thing I did like about EIBC was they had that, everything upstairs. They had their offices, they had, and that wasn't a huge ask. But I liked how they had the clubhouse up there, and they needed that because again, we can't have that on the ground anymore.
Well, I think a lot of people are starting to go to that concept of moving stuff from the ground to the roof, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a bar that's open to the public, whether it's meeting spaces. You get them higher off the ground, the less chance you're going to have to rebuild those, right?
Correct.
And some are dedicating elevators just specifically for that amenity. But I agree. But where's that fine line between, okay, I have to move all my cars up, so I need another floor. When does that not turn into 4 or 5 more floors? And 4 or 5 times more rooms, you know what I mean?
I agree.
That's the part that you have to weigh out through the public benefits, and go ahead, Jane, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no, I'm just putting my name in after.
Oh, I'm done.
Go, Jane.
Well, one of the problems I'm having with is, we understand everybody, wants to rebuild what they have and expand and all that kind of thing, but my problem is they're creating their own height. We know we have to raise for parking and all that kind of stuff, and that's not an issue for me. But where it goes from, for example, can we use something you started voting on?
I wouldn't.
Okay, so, for example, if
Increasing the size of units.
increasing the size of units, if your units were very small before, and now they're 4,000 square feet, where is the limit of what they can expand each individual unit before you say enough is enough? You could fit the same amount of units in 10 floors as opposed to 20 floors and still have very reasonable accommodations that are not, I'm just saying what has sold on the market on the island hasn't been 4,000 square foot everything. So I mean, none of these people are offering 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, they're all huge. And where's our market for, who comes in the winter are a couple. And their grandkids come for Christmas and Easter. And, you know, so we're gonna have all these huge places with 2 people in them. And maybe we'll have a whole different market where, you know, 4 couples come every time, which is gonna increase our intensity and density of everything. But my point is, at what point is big enough that we don't have to allow the height? You can say, you
Well,
know,
Jane, we don't have to allow the height ever.
I know, but my point is they're creating their own height. Because now they can have 4,000.
Because that's their plan.
Yeah,
The
but,
requirement for height,
but-
right?
but
It's
that-
more for-
we have to somehow find a way to handle that. Because they knew what they had when they bought it. So this is no big surprise that they knew what they could put back. And now they're asking for, 10 times that.
So I think you and I will probably always fundamentally disagree on that. I don't think it's any of our business, just like parking.
I don't think it's any of our business either.
You make your own business decision, you put your money at risk, you respond to the market, you make your case. And what we're trying to, I believe, represent is, and in addition to what you need to do, which we understand financially, mathematically, come talk to us about our island. Come talk to us being a partner, being a friend, being a neighbor. How does that look with the things that you represent you're willing to do? And as a developer, you're going to do things based on a lot of math. But in the end, there's got to have a heart come in. There's got to get a perspective about being part of what we always are, want to become, and want to stay. And you have to make your case to us for that. If you want exceptions to what you can do just mathematically. That's the balance that the elected officials, I believe, have to do. And the deeper we get into design or those kind of other criteria, we're not only not qualified to do it, there are property rights and other things that we violate playing in those edges that we don't want the town to have to defend because we think we can. So we just have a disagreement on that?
Well, I'm just saying, we have a house that can have, so many floors over parking, so here's your box. Why don't we have a box for commercial?
Well,
No, we did. We already do.
Yes,
yeah,
we do
we
have
are-
a box.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with Jim, it's not really our business, I think what James saying is there is a solution here, it's not as if, oh my gosh, my project doesn't work, I paid too much for the land to make this financially viable. Everybody knows what they did when they bought the land, and everybody knows what they can do, so I don't disagree with James, and I think, as an owner of 1,300 square foot condos, that, if I had 100 of them, they would rent January, February, March, and April every year. I think there's a market for smaller units, and I don't think you need 3,000 square feet. On the flip side, in my mind, I don't care if it's 3,000 or 4,000 square feet, if it's only 2 people, it's still only 2 cars, right? So, but I do think that we do have the, by default, if we limit height, you're not gonna, if you want more units, you're not going to be able to have 3,000 square foot units. You're gonna have to have 2,000 square foot or 1,500 or maybe some, like most of our island, I think is more like probably 8 to 1,200 square feet.
I think the breakdown in for me, the more I've looked into it, the more I agree with Jim and everyone else that it's not our job to design a project, right? It's not our job to get involved with, if you're gonna put a business up and you don't wanna have any parking, you're taking the risk, right? It's your money, but, and I try to stay away from that. You know what the guidelines are, what we're going through today is something that you're gonna need if you're gonna ask for more. Where I see a breakdown in the process is when our process allows what's happening right now. And what I mean by that is, if you could say we'll use 150 units as an example, and you convert that to hotel units. There's a multiplier that you can go through to get that, right? Now you look at that and that's the max that someone could do by right. Now if you take those units and you put them into a condo building and you make them 4,000 square feet, our process does not say because you now have 4 bedrooms that is increasing any density. It is. It's like adding 3 more hotel rooms. If you think about it, yes, we could say, are they always going to be full? I don't know. Maybe there's only 2 people there 50% of the year. But what if there are 8 people staying in that? Now you have 4 times more people, but it's still considered 1 unit. You know what I mean? And I think that's a breakdown in our code, and I think that's a breakdown in our process. I'm looking out at Sarah to see if she's not nodding her head, she's playing good poker over there. But she's got no tells, but to me, I think that's a process thing that we could work through the LPA and the council to figure out, to how do you. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna add, I don't know if this is on, but that, in a separate subject, we have talked about impact fees. And the size should be captured under impact fees, the overall
Yes.
square
Okay.
footage.
Yes.
When and if we get that, yes, I
When,
agree.
when.
Yes. I mean, a lot of these discussions, I think, would be much easier to have if we had that in place, right? I mean, if we wouldn't have to be discussing, they know the bigger they go, the more the impact fee is gonna be that they're gonna have to pay.
What's the
Right.
delay with that?
But
Well,
the,
they said it was gonna take some time, but.
I mean, I don't know if Sarah has some more information on that, but the impact fees is really just to cover the town's costs of the development, so that the town is not paying to help the developer build. So additional costs that are standard for a development, not like a special benefit above and beyond. So we're talking about sewer connection, making the water connection, whatever the town determines, you know, the public works determines that they need, those kinds of direct impacts. So it's a separate conversation, but I did want to add that in calculating impact fees, the size of the structure is taken into account.
No, and I get that,
Yeah.
and through all that, they're gonna have to meet the requirements to meet their infrastructure needs, I get that. But could a public benefit be, how do you go above and beyond that? How do you go above and beyond what is just gonna be required to maintain your water, or maintain your water pressure, or maintain your runoff? And now the entire public, we can use an impact fee. I've tried to talk to the attorneys about this to see if there's a way to do it. I don't know I'm legally, we don't have a microphone, so.
Well, you didn't want to talk.
I talked
You
a
didn't-
lot yesterday.
You don't think you're gonna get off that easy?
No, I think what you have to do is create a fund where there can be a contribution made by the property owner developer towards that fund, which is towards the greater good for the public. For example, a parking garage. I'm not saying that that
Right,
is in
no.
your cards. However, that is one that is typically done, and then there's a contribution made into that fund for a future parking garage, which benefits the entire community.
And see, I think that, to me, is a good public benefit, because that's something that doesn't tie this council or future councils to, well, this, now we gotta go through this entire process again, because it's 10 years later, and, you know, now we have no buildable space left, and there are no parks available, but we need more pipes, or we need to redo a side streets, or we need to do something like that.
So I use the example of a public parking garage, however, there's other things, and those quote, "other things" are generally found in a community's strategic plan, which I know your town manager is diligently working on having that created, and then that gives the property owner developer an idea of what
To aspire to.
to aspire to, and then again, creating a fund for a future purchase or a future acquisition to actually make that strategic plan item reality.
Yeah, but how do you make it so open-ended so that you use parking garage, but let's use something that's, I think, land acquisition, you know, if there is something that the town could purchase. She's waving her hand, now. Brought her into the fray. Welcome, Sarah.
Good morning. I apologize for being late. So I wanted to let you know that one option also is to create plans. Like if you have a streetscape plan, if you have a, different types of plans put in place, and you have the intent to do those,
Yeah.
you can create funds for those that go specifically into those funds. And then you're able to do that more easily because you have a goal. You know what that goal is. It's something that's going to happen. You have a time. You have money going into it. So one really good way to do that is to come up with like what you need, what you want. If that's a parks
So-
plan, like a Parks and Rec plan.
What about what about a seawall coastal protection system?
Yeah,
Resiliency
exactly.
plan. Well,
Yeah.
it could be just a resiliency plan.
So if you come up with a plan and you have a proposed amount that you need to get to, and maybe there's a certain part of the community that's going to be potentially, particularly impacted by it, you can set up a way to make sure that you're getting funds into that so that you can get it done.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at, just as a resilience plan, I know it was talked about by Council Woodson, you know, seawalls.
Right.
Seawalls alone, if that's in a
Dredging.
resiliency plan, and you can use that, or dredging the canals,
Huge.
that's
There you
something
go.
that the entire island can benefit from.
Well, and it really helps because if you've done the planning first, then you know exactly how much you need, you know what permits you're gonna have to get, for example, if you're gonna do seawalls. You know, you wanna make sure that you get it all cleared with DEP first, and then you're ready to run. You can kinda set it up a little bit better, cause you've managed that.
So can you
first.
create a plan, let's say it's the resiliency plan, even though you haven't gone through the DEP, because there's a lot of things that could fall into that. You know, it could be seawalls, it could be canal dredging, it could be, you know,
Vegetation.
dry flood proof, yeah, it could be a lot of things in that bucket.
Transportation systems.
Yeah, something, I mean, is that all something that could go in before you had to go through the DEP process, or before?
Yeah, certainly you could do all the planning in advance. So setting up, I mean, the first step is to decide what it is that you're trying to do, you know, what your goal is, and then to write that plan, come up with all the components. You know, it would be a back and forth process between LPA, town council, you know, whoever's gonna be involved until you got to the plan that you really want. Similar to a comp plan, but, you know, it could be on a much smaller scale or a more specific scale.
Should be part of the strategic planning process.
Getting back to what, you know, Jane brought up, that there are ordinances and approaches based on a bedroom formula for contributions to schools and parks and things that you can relate to, and that way the impact of a larger unit would carry a bigger financial contribution to the town.
Like that.
I like that
And-
too, but one thing you gotta remember, and I see your point, Mayor, that when you have a 4-unit, you're gonna have potentially 4 couples. But you have to remember, that's only going to happen currently around Christmas, probably Shrimp Fest. The rest of the time, I just don't, you know, been doing this a long time, I just don't see the numbers where that unit's gonna have 4 couples every week.
That's right.
It's
Yeah,
just
but is it safe to
mathematically.
say nobody has numbers for what the next 10 years are
Yeah,
gonna be? We're
and
in a
we
totally-
don't, but
you know, the
I
demographic
can
of
assure
what's
you
gonna
that
look
in
like.
August, it's not gonna be packed.
But the
in
point is,
September.
these 4,000 square foot units are now going to cost a whole lot more than the 2-bedroom units that you've been renting. So it's
Absolutely.
going to take a couple couples to make the rent.
I'm telling you, the metrics, the 1-bedrooms make the most money per person. I mean, it just does, they rent more, they get a higher
Sure.
rate, so.
Could we hear from Councilmember King? Do you have anything on this?
Well, not specifically dealing with that. These meetings frustrate me as a former facilitator because I want to know where, let's discuss it, what have we solved here, move on. And I don't get that. I get everything from everybody. Oh, and this just popped into my head. But speaking of that, this just popped into my head. Watching your meeting yesterday, I thought it was excellent. I see with Jim Bowen's public deeded parking spaces. I'd like to build onto that. I think we saw that with Pink Shell when they talked about pumping out the town boat. Is that something that can be put in along those lines by someone else as well, that saves the town money and time? I noticed yesterday with the Neptune that they were willing to, in their parking area, give up folks, because I think John talked about it at Diamond Head with the last couple storms, moving it to higher ground, if it's available. Can we put then town vehicles in there, and does that that will save the town money and time? Along those kind of lines, I would like to see something a little more around that as well, as a public benefit, I think. And with that, I will let Jim talk. Whichever Jim would like to talk. Or maybe a John, since there's only 2 of us.
Well, maybe-
Doug?
We like the J names.
Doug, do you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, and ties into something Anita was saying too, and others, that in you know, in anything, there's like, you know, Adam Smith's invisible hand, right? The economics
That's right.
that really steer things.
That's right.
And in the long run, you have very limited ability to change that, other than to steer it. And I think what we're talking about is, we know the the island's not gonna redevelop like it was. It's gonna be different. And we have an ability right now to steer that direction, but we probably wouldn't be able to change it because of the economics, or Adam Smith's invisible hand is gonna push a certain way that is just gonna have to happen in our free market society. So I think and it's kind of a difficult challenge to define these issues, but what we're trying to do is steer things to a vision that we have for the island. Inclusiveness, maintain a character that's different than Clearwater or St. Pete Beach or other places, Naples. And we want to have a unique character, but we can steer it, but we're not going to be able to change what happens, I don't think. Yep.
Vice Mayor?
You know me, I'm so shy. I've been just listening quietly here.
Oh, boy.
I have just a couple thoughts with respect to this issue. This is a great discussion. I love what the LPA's been wrestling with on this. I think a couple things. I love this concept. I'm glad we're in agreement that that a formulaic approach is not going to work in a practical sense. I love this concept of giving guidelines to those who want to invest in our community as to what our priorities are, and how you could help our community through a public benefit in return for additional whatever you're asking for. Not that you'll get it, but at least you'll have a guideline as to what we're looking for. And I think economic development used by certainly most state entities is to guide what the community is looking for, whether it be high-paying manufacturing jobs up in the Midwest, which is usually what drove us in Indiana, completely different down here, but it's still a very useful tool. So I would say if we have this wonderful guideline, and we have an additional guideline that's a little firmer, which is our LDC and our comp plan, I think we get this aggregate list of guidelines, which is great. We give it to the developer. They use their creativity to make a pitch, and hopefully some of those items are symbiotic. I mean, we talk sometimes that, the developer's going to make money off this. Well, if they make money off something that's also a public benefit and benefits the people of our town, it's a symbiotic benefit where we all win, and that's not a bad thing. So, but I think it ultimately comes down to when you have these proposals before us. I mean, we're elected, and we've appointed people. The people who are appointed were appointed by people who are elected. So this is a very democratic process, but at the same time, at some point, the voters would ask us to use our discernment. And it sort of comes down to what a former Supreme Court justice once described as his definition of pornography, and it's "I know it when I see it." And so at some point, as we weigh these projects individually, case by case, I think we're going to get to that point. I just have a couple kind of issues that I want to posit to you. I don't have complete answers, but I think they're worth chewing on. I'm sure my friend Greg Skasny is watching. We had a feverish exchange last night, once again, on these issues, respectful. But do we want to think about, right now we're finding projects that are sort of replacing what was there, maybe have a different vision, but they're really replacing what's there. But I think this concept of the fear of a Clearwater concept, that involves taking these smaller properties and aggregating them into one large, big development. So eliminating the opportunities for mom and pops, and just creating a different environment here. If somebody comes to us who's bought 13 properties and wants to build this massive development, do we want to in our guidelines discourage that by saying, okay, you can do that and you can do what you can do by right, but if you're going to come for additional height and density, we're not going to be real excited about that. So that's a way to kind of address that concern about the Clearwater issue. I don't think it's a threat right now, but it could be 5-10 years from now. I think another dynamic, again, this is really helpful with the non-formulaic approach, is, but I also want to encourage those people who are putting their capital at risk now. The early entrants that we're seeing now, first of all, they're local. We're very blessed by that. I don't think we realized how blessed we are by the fact that this capital is local. But second of all, they're putting their capital at risk at a time when Fort Myers Beach has a degree of uncertainty and risk. We all know who the players are who are sitting on the sidelines right now just to see what happens, let it shake out. Well, that's great for them, but that doesn't do the island any good. I'm thankful for those folks who they're taking a lot of bruises, but they're putting their capital at risk now so we can move now, so we don't have to wait 5 or 10 years now. So I don't know how we build that into the equation, but it's certainly something we may want to suggest as a guideline. And the other dynamic I think is important, and a non-formulaic approach is what will help this, but is the third and fourth hotel on the south end as valuable as the first and second in terms of public benefits? Same with restaurant. So you've got this dynamic, which I'm thankful in your proposal, Jim, you didn't put a point system on, because I think that's where it gets really challenging, and also location on the island. And lastly, what I mentioned at the meeting, and I'd love to see this fit in, and I'm not saying it's easy. We saw it with Myerside, how hard it was. But if we're trying to get a doc here, or somebody who can write a script, or a dentist, or a physical therapist, we need to build in, at least demonstrate to the potential investor that if they can facilitate something like that, it's not easy. We would look favorably upon that. And same with the sort of the second level, which would be the hair salon, barber, the bank, the vet, the florist, whatever the need might be of the town at that time. I'd like to at least give some of those suggestions, and those may evolve over time, and we can always update this list. But we need to use this great opportunity to try to incent what we're trying to do as a community and where we want to go as a community. So I'm rambling, but one last thing on these parking lots that get ceded over to the town for revenue. I think that's great and all, but I think we need to be a little careful with that, because, the town, according to Matt Caldwell, eventually a year or two from now, financially, we may be in very good shape for a lot of different reasons, which we don't have time to get into today. And so maybe that parking lot might be better off as a park at some point, with a nice view corridor, with native grasses that you can actually see the water from the road without any tall vegetation. And that revenue from that parking lot becomes a little less significant. And I don't know that we want to build in incentives over a park, particularly 5-10 years from now, when I think this island's going to be flourishing, that discourages that and incents more parking lots, particularly if we do eventually build a town parking lot or something to that effect, or something off island. So anyways, just some additional food for thought.
Well, it also takes away a heat island as well.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, you're right. Can I think we need to clarify something. Jim, you're talking about guidelines. I'm talking about expectations. And
Okay.
to me, those are very different.
Yeah, that's fair. I meant to use the word suggestions, but expectations are good too. I like that. I like that even better.
Does everybody agree with that? I mean, to me, this is, here's where you should be. This isn't just, it's not a suggestion, we're expecting this. Is that fair, Jim?
Well, it's fair. It's fair, except I think when you say expecting it, we're expecting something in varying degrees. In other words,
Sure, of
the
course.
guideline might be better in one
Sure,
part of the island
sure.
and more symbiotic in another part. But I think that's fine. I mean, it's semantics again, but I think it's important, and I don't have any problems with expectations.
We're expecting people to be partners in our community. That's
you
what we're
We
expecting.
are, and that's another piece I think I talked about during the LPA is what I'll describe as an orientation. When there's a project on someone's mind, what's the best way to interact with our community in a preemptive way that suggests, encourages that there's certain things that we value a lot.
That's right.
Dan and I talked at some length when he was proposing the multiples on the impact fees, and it was a great conversation to put some math around the financial realities that we have to deal with when developments come in. I mentioned to him that not only is I supportive of that, but I think it has to be an either and versus an either or. There's a whole bunch of other things that make our community work. It's too easy for the people with resources to solve their problems with resources and then think that they are included, embraced, inoculated into what we believe and care about, and that's not enough. It should never be enough for us. That's why we have both professional lives and church lives. We need the whole dynamic to make us what we're capable of being. So where do we touch each other early on to set they can do the math. They don't need us at all to sit down and do the math for them. That's going to come and be done, and their check will be written and say, by the way, I'll give you this ahead of time. And that's not impressive at all. That just is respectful. They're going to follow what we ask. But then where do we go from there? And whether there's a series of expectations around meeting with a member of the LPA and council, instead of us being 12 people individually, we have some teamwork together in that, if that's allowed and not illegal, that we would attend in a dynamic way, the town halls that we expect them to put on, where there's a couple of us there and interacting to continue to coach and guide the conversation. That is, in my mind, nebulous and ambiguous enough, but clear enough for those that care to figure out and bring us a recommendation or alternative that says, I heard you. Isn't that the people you want to be around? Don't your best friends know what to say or do without you ever telling them? They just figure it out because the relationship matters. And I don't want to lose that piece. All due respect to the approaches we can take with Sarah, I don't want to lose that piece formulaically that we don't have those conversations.
So I need to just jump in. I understand where you're coming from with expectations, but it concerns me a little bit. It's the E word, extractions. So I just need a little bit of flexibility when, ultimately when something is drafted, that if I don't use the
How
word.
about an aspiration? So there's a great quote.
Yes.
People will rise to the level of expectations you place upon them. If we as a community say, this is what we want, this is what we want. John just brought up a great point about heat, and yesterday it came up in the conversation. There was a woman named Susan here who gave public comment about you heard that, about that, and it was something I didn't think about, but she was absolutely spot on about lowering the temperature. So here's what we aspire to, and
Yes.
I don't know, Andy, I don't know how your strategic plan is working at this point, but these are conversations that the community should be having. And we should be having it so that the community knows that we're thinking about it and that we're affirming it, and so that the developers know what we expect or what we aspire to.
Thank you.
So you like aspire better than expect?
Madam
Fine.
Chair. I
It was
think an-
very inspiring.
yes.
The E word.
I think another public benefit is time frame. Some of these projects are coming in with 20 years and even longer, and I think that those that are coming in with, we're gonna tear down first quarter of next year, and we're going to follow up with, 6 months of permits, and then we're gonna start building. That I wanna hear. I don't wanna hear, we want 10 years, 20 years, so maybe we'll sell it to somebody else. But we get the permits and we get
You
what
want to
we
hear
want.
that, but with everything that's gone on in the last 8 years of our lives, that's, we could get more red tide, we could get
Well, I
another
agree.
financial
You can ask
crisis,
for
we
an
get a world
extension,
war.
but the point is, if your plan is to wait 20 to 25
I
years.
agree, I
we
agree
can't
with
wait
you, but
that
you
long.
can't codify that though. I mean, you can have the aspiration, but you can't make someone do something if interest rates are through the roof, or there's a war going on, or who knows. I mean, we can aspire them to get going, but you can't codify it.
I think you have to, because otherwise we're gonna be, it's
Sitting
counterproductive
empty.
to exactly
Yeah.
what we're trying to accomplish now, and that's to get people to build back,
Well,
right?
I want people building back and
I don't
building
know
back
that,
now.
I don't know that there's
But-
there's an appetite to aspire to have someone come in 15 years from now when their CPD expires to ask
Right.
for another 5 or 10 year extension.
Well,
And my
we
point
don't
is
want that
that's a
either.
benefit.
Like we've seen
But
happen already.
But what I'm saying is, if a war
Okay.
happens next year and the
Scott,
interest rates go through the roof,
Let me
they're
qualify
gonna-
that. I'm saying that time frame is a benefit.
Sure, absolutely.
So if
I
they
will
can
agree.
come in
I
and
will agree with
say,
you.
we're gonna start in 6 months with tearing down and moving forward.
I'm okay with
then,
that.
because they can't
Benchmarks.
leave it
Yeah.
empty. We
Yeah, we can have
want
benchmarks.
something to happen now because we need it to happen now for this town.
I
Okay,
agree.
can we hear from you, Karen? I like your bracelet.
Thank you.
Which one?
Is it from the Islander?
No, no, it's not actually.
Find out where she got it, put it in your inventory.
There you go.
This is
Actually got it from
From
my
the-
salon. Okay, so, a couple of things, and I'm gonna be in very different directions, I think. We talk about these big developments, but in reality, there's only about 4 to 5 places on the island that any of this can even happen. Definitely the Red Coconut. It could happen up by Moss Marine. It can happen where the Wyndham is, and happen at the old Outrigger. So if you look at those places, and we're talking about, worried about all this height happening and everything else, like Jim said, the only other way that can happen is if a whole neighborhood would decide that they want to sell to a developer, and instead of having 20 individual homes, it now becomes a huge development,
Like Gulf Colony.
like Gulf Colony. But the chances of that happening right now or in the next 20 years or something like that are slim to none. I mean, people are looking at their own properties. You look at everything for sale, they're still all individual properties. And part of me says, in this last election, I think constituents spoke. If people wanted to keep things the same,
then we would probably have Mr. Skasny sitting in that chair instead of Mr. Safford. But Safford won, and that kind of set the direction about development. They're mandating development is what's happening. We always hear from the same 50 to 75 people, but you don't hear from the, what I call the silent majority, unless you're one-on-one with them. That's when you hear about them. But I also think we have to look big picture, outside of the box, what's not being addressed right now. Resilience is huge. You know, keeping our island safe from its own self, from its environment. The transportation, we've got to start thinking outside of the box about transportation systems on this island. Waterways and canals, they haven't been touched. There is so much out there, so much debris. We don't have anything in our plans for any kind of canal cleanup, waterway cleanup, dredging. I mean, these are things that are huge contributions to the whole island, and some that we're not addressing in anything. And how do we get these things addressed? So that's just some of my opinions.
I think also an airport, a
Shuttle?
airport shuttle that, you know, everybody's saying,
Or an airport
we're
would be
gonna
a
put
good
in
idea, too."
water taxes and that kind of stuff.
Take the whole
But the
stuff.
point is,
Helipads all
How about
over now.
if we can actually offer a way for people to get here without everybody paying, you know, $60 to come from the airport, each way, they may take it, because otherwise it's, you know, cheaper to rent a car.
Float planes.
Yeah, so, but,
Seattle.
you know, hotels in the city have drop-offs at each hotel, and each hotel contributes to getting that done, and that's a concierge plan that they have within their hotels that we don't have to pay for, but they should be. I mean, then, you know, the town people will join in on helping to pay that services by using those services also.
Well, not only the guests, but the employees as well.
Right, exactly.
I
You heard
think,
They talk about that yesterday.
I think that we should realize that I think this moment is magical in a whole lot of ways. The obvious being what it is, but we are sitting here as collective bodies, having a conversation about things we care about, and there are people watching. They're listening, they're paying attention. Smart people don't need to be explained to. They're picking up on what's happening right now just because we got together and talked about this. All due respect to Councilor King, this won't end up in a formulaic, let's get this done. I'm convinced there's not a will for that, and I don't think it's the right outcome. But just the fervor behind and the amount of alignment that we have as a community to say, you better come talk to us about this if you want to have our arms wide open versus closed, being suspicious on the math that you can provide. I just don't want to miss that, because we've all lived enough places. This doesn't happen anywhere else except where people care about each other and ultimately our community to sit down and spend our time together to do this.
And I'm not looking for a formula. I'm sorry if I made that part of it. The facilitator in me has an agenda, sees the agenda. You all discuss this item. Where are we now? Let's bounce back on this, because we have a tendency to roam around to A to C to D to F to X, and that's what I'm trying to say, is that I would like to, I don't know where we are on this right now. I see a lot of proposals that I'd like to see a little more fleshed out, and that's what I wanted to see a couple of weeks ago. But I agree with a lot of these things. That's why I added my 2 cents worth. That was an X or something like that. But
Well said.
Jim, I appreciate the comment that this is a magical time, because I think I am seeing that more, even though for me it is a time of tremendous fear and
I
anxiety.
get that. Now watch you go through that.
You know, and it's like and for so many people on the island, I mean, in my store, day in and day out, if you came in and sat there for a day, you would listen to the sadness that people have and the anxiety that people have. It's all personal. Not much of it at all is town-wide. It's about what they're suffering and what they're enduring. And so and you heard Pat yesterday say it, he's tired. I mean, we're all tired. But I agree, for us to be sitting here and having this conversation is telling people, whomever they're going to be, and we know them, these are the things that are important to us, these are the things that we aspire to, and these are the things that we wish you will bring to the table. And that is very, very important. But I guess I'd ask Judith and what's your name? I know. And Sarah, what are you hearing from us? And whether or not Andy and Frankie have any questions that might help. I mean, in the next development agreement, do you hear what's being said here? And is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Is there something that we need to push forward on?
I don't know what you're seeing with the.
Thank you,
Yeah,
that's
so
kind of what
that's-
I'm.
I knew,
trying to-
yeah.
Part of it is my attempt to take notes here, so you can
Yeah.
see what it is I'm hearing. So if any of this is incorrect, or please feel free to correct me. One of the things I heard at the, sorry,
Can you make that bigger?
Yeah, that's what we're all saying.
I don't know.
Well, can I add something before you answer that question?
Okay.
Because I heard from the vice mayor, and I heard from you, and you guys are saying the same thing. There's only gonna be 4 or 5 big developments, but if these smaller lots can't get developed, then what's gonna happen? They're either gonna be empty, or
They're
you're
gonna join up.
Right, so
it's
let's,
not gonna
why
be
don't we get
fragmented.
ahead of the curve and try to figure out what we can do to get those smaller lots developed? Is it the we thought it was the development agreement.
That was the original
idea.
part of the
So-
development agreement.
I think we're all kind of saying the same thing, but to Counselor King's point, if we can come to agreement, I don't know what the answer is. There's a lot of smart people in this room,
Times
but
Square is another huge one.
Times Square is, that's another issue, but I think we owe it to the public that if we're committed to, rebuilding this island together and focus on boutique hotels, small businesses, how do we help those lots get sold, get developed, and get invested in?
Judith is
So
raising
can
her hand.
I want to answer your point, and then I want to also answer Anita's point as well. One of the things I heard you say at one point is that you want the development agreement judged on the same criteria as the CPD, which is, we know what those criteria are, but then that begs the question, why have the development agreement if it's going to be the same?
No, I don't think that's what we said, Judith. I think what we said was that we want to talk about special benefits, public benefits, that those words should be interchangeable in a development agreement. Am I wrong?
Okay,
That's right.
okay.
Go agree completely.
That's a helpful clarification.
Yeah, yeah.
But to Mr. Safford's
Judith, you could use the mic.
sorry, to Mr. Safford's point, one of the things that we're seeing is, as you say, there are not so many large collected parcels at the moment, but there are smaller projects. And when the smaller projects come, they need the same things that these big projects are asking for. They need that, either a deviation, a variance, depending on what route they're going, for that ground level parking. Every project needs that. We haven't seen pretty much anything that's come in where it's anything of more than just a tiny lot, where they don't need a variance, where they don't need.
Let's throw
deviation.
parking out the window. I think we can all agree on
So
that.
that
That
I mean,
has to do
Yeah.
with the definition of how we're
Figure it out
defining
yourself.
FAR.
Exactly.
If we can take that ground level, or even in a larger development, the second floor of parking, that we're requiring them to put in this parking, but we're penalizing them on the FAR, which is really what they're selling, what they're going to put their investment into. I think that would help the smaller projects, some of these smaller projects, because they have to come in and they have to ask for these deviations, variances, and we're pushing them through this onerous project. There's very little that can be built by right without any special thing. And so when these small projects come, then they also have to say, well, we're providing a special benefit or a public benefit, and they have less of an ability to do that. So one of the things that we've kind of thought about is that with the development agreement, maybe that's more appropriate for a smaller project. Because at a smaller project, then we can think about, you can look at that separately from the way you look at a CPD for the larger project, where you're looking for more out of it because it's gonna have more of a impact. That's just a suggestion. As a way, because I think that the intent of that development agreement when it came through was for that to be a kind of a quicker process, to get things, moving a little bit quicker. But when you've got a large project, it just takes time. It just does because of the size of it, and they will probably need some kind of deviation or variance. So that's one suggestion. I mean, I think taking that parking levels, that ground level out of the FAR, that'll help a lot of projects move forward.
Fencing on the parking.
I mean, and because what you see is that ground level gets counted as a floor, and then it gets counted as a parking, as part of the FAR, but then it's not, the investor, the builder is not getting that, kind of return on investment for that level. So what you may see, you may see another level, in height in some of those smaller projects. So that's something to think about. But I think that there is ways to do that, especially these smaller projects, to encourage that redevelopment without them having to come to the LPA and the town council, which would get them moving faster.
Yeah.
Well, I think that Councilor Stafford's always said that about the development agreement, geared more towards the small business person.
Right.
But who's the one
But
that used it?
there's
I understand.
so we have it, but we haven't put any gas into it. So I think the gas would be, hey, we're all going to agree that parking's not going to be counted in FAR. We're going to allow you to take what you had on the ground level and put it up. We're not even going to tell you how many parking spots you need because you're going to have to figure that out yourself. I think
It
if
should be totally out of the equation.
but
We
if
don't
we
even want
do
people
something
to
like
hear
that to let the smaller investor know, hey, we want you to build back, and we're gonna allow you to do this, and maybe we have like a time frame on it. Jane, maybe we say for the next 5 years, if you're willing to invest and rebuild, we'll give you this, this, and this in exchange for you doing it within the next 5 years.
And then it might change after 5 years, what we're willing to accept.
And this not for large parcels, but for small. And I don't. That's an attorney question. Can we quantify it under an acre? Can we? So many rooms.
How does that concerns me with spot zoning, and this whole conversation is concerning to me for multiple reasons. One, the spot zoning part of it. If I'm a large developer and you're saying you're giving special rules to a smaller development that I'm not allowed to have, to me that sounds like spot zoning. And you're the attorney, you tell me if I'm wrong, but the other thing that concerns me is if you're just gonna completely eliminate, where, do you stop it?
I'm throwing it out there.
I know, I'm
just
just
giving
trying
examples.
to be devil's
maybe.
advocate of what could potentially come down the road. Because a developer is hearing, okay, and now I can go I'm gonna push my luck and go 3 stories of parking, and now I'm gonna be 3 stories before I even get to any livable space that's gonna be parking. Everything you give, they're going to push the limit on. That's their business, that's their job, that's how they make their money. That's what they're gonna do. And then they're gonna negotiate down to what everybody can live with. So I'm very hesitant to just say, we're not going to do that, because then you might as well change your comp planning and land development code to say that.
Could I offer a suggestion? So we've got base flood elevation, and we just saw one that was 17, and with the 3 feet over, it became 20 feet, and that's what resulted in 2 floors of parking. So if it's anything that's non-habitable, in other words, it's below that level, then it doesn't contribute to FAR because you're having to use it for
Which is
either
where
open
the original
space.
discussion was to eliminate that because of that reason.
Right.
Now we're talking about a second story not counting as FAR.
Well, no, I'm trying to,
What
I'm trying
he's
to
saying is
accomplish
anything
that.
under base flood doesn't count. Anything above base flood counts.
So if you have 25 feet of base flood and you could put 3 very short stories in there, for example, and they were parking, then they would not contribute. It would generally be 2. But what we see on this island, right, is anything that's on the beach side is gonna be 15, 17, 20 feet. And that easily could be 2 stories. And I'm saying to the intent of not counting parking, but ensuring that you don't have somebody who wants to build a 5-story parking garage with 5 stories of habitable space on top. You've now created something that would restrict that.
So what I'm hearing is kind of changing our codes to not to bypass a development agreement process. What I would say is that the way that your current process is written, it's very, very flexible. And I think it could accommodate a small project as well. The odorous would be that the small project would have to go to the LPA and then to council for 2 readings. If that is burdensome, then you need to consider.
Did you turn that off, Nancy, or is that a battery issue?
Somebody has been wanting him to talk.
Well, it's not Nancy Day anymore, so.
No, I know.
Can you read this one?
Sure. Switch sides. So I'm kind of hearing two things. One is the need to perhaps amend some of your existing codes that would allow some of these smaller projects to go ahead and go through the process and possibly even obtain an administrative approval without having additional public comment. My comment was that when the development agreement process was created, it was intended not only for the larger developments as the one we have now, but also for the smaller projects. We just haven't had a smaller project go through. We had a larger project that's almost done with the process, and we had a couple little blips. So we've had to come back and try to address those. But if we had a smaller project try to go through that process, maybe that process would work. I will remind everyone that yes, that process entails an LPA review and 2 public meetings before the town council. That may be too onerous from a policy perspective for some of these smaller projects. But it might not be. I don't know. I mean, if it's crystal clear as to what they want to do and it looks like it does have some special benefit or a public benefit, maybe that process would work. We just haven't gone through that yet.
So, in hearing everything that everyone is saying, we are going back into public input for the comprehensive plan and for the land development code. And I wonder if it would make sense to do a bit more visioning in that rather than just looking explicitly into what the comprehensive plan says, but really looking at what the town wants, what it feels, what we're going for. Because I think that could help guide developers too, in understanding what it is that the town wants. Not just a kind of a general, but like have more detail, maybe have some pictures, have some designs that everybody says, yeah, that's, say, a very specific Florida vernacular that we like, so we don't end up with something that everyone is sort of feeling not great about. Maybe come up with some areas that the town is interested in having specific small area plans. And that helps guide development too, so that developers can come in and say, oh, we know for sure that they want this type of use here. We know for sure that they want 4 stories. We know for sure. So that stability and understanding what the town actually is looking for helps drive development.
Yes.
Because it's more secure. They understand, okay, I can build this. I know what that's gonna cost. I know what I can spend. Just gives them the ability to know what the town wants before they get too far into the process. Because right now where we're at is, somebody comes forward with a plan and staff is basing it on what the comprehensive plan says and the land development code says. But then it gets to the LPA and the town council and you guys don't necessarily agree. We've been guiding them because that's how the process works and this is what our code says and this is what our comp plan says. And it puts us in a pretty crummy position because we're trying to get them to the finish line. We're trying to help them to get there. And it's not clear what everyone wants. The things that you wanted 10 years ago are not the things that you want today. So going through that whole visioning process where everybody can come out and be involved and, say what matters to them, I think would be really helpful. And
Extraordinarily helpful, Sarah.
okay, so I think that that's a really good place to start, and then we can build up that comprehensive plan with that vision in it. We can build up the land development code with that vision in it. I did reach out to Jason. He said that they're working on doing researching for the impact fees. That they're researching needs of the town and that they want to have a meeting with the town council soon. So he's reaching out. I said, when can you schedule that? So he's working on getting that done, and hopefully that will be in December. So fingers crossed, you guys might have a meeting about impact fees in December.
Great. Okay, so Judith, back to your list. Can you just go over it, because I cannot read it, I'm sorry, and I've got glasses on. Well, I can kind of read it.
Okay, so I've just been taking general notes. They're not really in any specific order. I just added what Sarah said about the comprehensive plan
Yes.
update, including visioning and the creation of small area plans. And then the land development code would be updated based on whatever came out of those conversations. The comp plan has to be finalized first, and then we can work on the land development code. After that, I have guidelines, guiding principles. I don't know whether you wanna cut and paste what Mr. Dunlop had in his, those, whether that works for you, but that's something that I heard consistently, that people were looking for overarching guidelines, for coming up with what is a public benefit.
Well, let's just ask that. Do you all agree with those? Because, I mean, basically, the three guidelines, aspirations, whatever word you wanna put in there, that Dunlap has listed are really itemized, more or less, or illustrated by Bowen over here. So, they're on the same page there. Do you all agree with this?
Yes.
Very much so.
Yes?
Could we, and forgive me if I miss this, but could we include a category of sort of essential services, getting into the medical, dental, physical therapy? Just something in that, I don't know how, those will be challenging to accomplish, but they certainly should be aspirational for our island.
But, Jim, I've always struggled with that. I agree with you in concept on that, but those services are going to be dictated by the cost of everything, and the costs are gonna dictate that. We can say we really wanna do it, and they can stand there and say, we really wanna do it too, but they don't have any control of it, just like we don't have any control. And I don't know how you put that in there I see it maybe as a guideline principle. We want to.
That's
like,
the goal.
If there's a way you could get to it, but
It's to send a message to those who invest in the community, particularly in a larger development, that if they bring something unique to the table, let's say they've got a relationship or a partnership with a medical facility where they could do a branch or even if they've got a relationship with an urgent care and they could bring it to the island, they could facilitate that. There's unique developers out there that have a lot of connections. If they could make that happen and they could offer that, we would look favorably upon that. Wouldn't guarantee they get what they want, but it would certainly be something we would welcome. It's again, an aspirational goal. And I think if I'm a developer and I see this litany of things that that the town is looking for, and they say, well, my goodness, one of my subs in my corporation actually owns an urgent care, and I could move one of those over there pretty easily, and I could find a doc and do all this, or a physician's, nurse practitioner, or whatever. I could put that there, and I just don't. I want to, because we're obviously trying to give some guidance as to what we need and what we're looking for on the island. So I agree with you. It could be difficult, but we may have unique situations where, this is your world, Jim Dunlop. I mean, there may be unique situations where a developer could actually make that happen in a much more definitive way than Myerside did.
Yeah,
I agree with you. Myerside was really sketchy. I mean, certainly aspirational. I don't mean sketchy in a I don't mean it in a pejorative
He's on the
sense.
record now.
No, but I don't mean it in a pejorative sense. They just couldn't guarantee it. So we tried to put some incentives in. But I do think there are some developers who could potentially guarantee it. And I would certainly want to let them know that this is certainly a need on Fort Myers Beach.
yeah, I think, when you talk about this, the more I try to formulate how you can get to, like a restaurant, for instance. If most developers I've talked to, it's a restaurant is not, whether it's a hotel or it's a condominium, it's not a revenue generator for them.
Agreed.
It's a necessity for them to entice people to buy or stay at their place, but they don't necessarily make any money off it. How can that be applied to what you're saying, a haircut place
I'll give you an
a
example.
dentist or something? How can that be applied to
I'll give you an example.
make it work for what they need as well?
Let's say somebody buys, hands in prayer, somebody buys Kia Stero, and they say, I want to go up 2 or 3 stories. And they say, I want to go up 2 or 3 stories, and that doesn't really fit into our vision for that particular location. Then they say, well, listen, wait a minute. My entity owns a series of dental offices, this and that, and we will guarantee we'll put a doc in there, we'll put a dentist in there. And
That's the only way it could happen, if that entity owned those businesses.
Well, not the only
No,
way, but have
no,
a
no,
relationship.
But listen,
Yeah.
those medical type services are limited by what they can charge. So, you know what? Take my business, you can plot me anywhere, and instead of charging $68 for the bracelet, I could charge $128 for the bracelet. But that isn't true of a dentist or any other type of medical personnel, because they're guided by insurance.
Anita, I agree with you in a perfect world, in a normal Fort Myers Beach world. We're not living in a normal Fort Myers Beach. We have a dramatic shortage of retail because we have a dysfunctional situation with
Yep.
2 of our key retail outlets.
Yep.
So we're not living in, I agree with you normally, but we're living in the bizarro Postian world. And I think that's why we have to be more aggressive in going after some of these services, or they're just not gonna come organically, I don't think.
I'm in agreement with putting it in as a guiding principle of essential services, and essential services is a big open bucket. I mean, it's not necessarily just.
Yeah, I don't mind opening the bucket, but those are three pretty easy ones, because we have an older population, so physical therapy is a big deal. Obviously, everybody needs a dentist, and everybody needs somebody who can write a script. You've got a UTI or a sinus infection or whatever, you don't wanna have to drive over to. Well, chiropractor, you could throw that on there, I have no problems with that. But I just think, I mean, those are basic blocking and tackling of life. I mean, we talk about people tease me about the haircut thing. But I mean, do I have to drive to Margaritaville with a beautiful salon to get my hair cut? I mean, that's the only place on the island. So we all hop in the car once a month and we drive off island. We contribute to the traffic. I mean, it's nuts. I mean,
You don't go to Margaritaville. You don't contribute to the local economy for your
well,
haircut,
I've
Jim?
tried,
Is that what you-
actually, Anita, I actually tried to make an appointment at Margaritaville. They don't have somebody who cuts men's hair there on staff. They have to bring them in off island, special for the appointment.
Really?
So, and God bless them. I mean, if there's not enough men getting their hair cut at Margaritaville, it makes sense. I'm not blaming them. But there is no way where for, so we're all hopping in our cars and we're contributing to the mess here on Fort Myers Beach. And I think Scott's made this point numerous times. If we could get some of these places on the island, we're not, the traffic issue, at least in terms of our contribution to it, would diminish greatly. In the old days, when Santini Plaza was flourishing, aside from going to our local Publix, I could go for a month without ever getting in my car. So I mean, these are the kind of basic services we ought to try to incent and encourage to come back. And again, in a perfect world, I understand the market forces, but we're living in a bizarro world, particularly with this retail situation.
So you want something, as a number 4, that would go to lines of accelerating and or providing essential services for the island?
Yeah,
Is that what you're talking about?
And I'd like to give a couple examples,
Yeah,
because if I'm
and
a
I-
developer, I'd like to know what you're talking about.
I think if we do that, if we put that as a guiding principle, and then down below, under a product or service, enhance what we're define what we're talking about, it marries back the guiding principle of we value that so much, and here's some of the examples we value further.
That's great.
Is that
Yeah,
okay?
That'd be fun, yeah.
Can I interrupt just real quick? Just because of the definition, we have a definition of essential services in our code. If we could use a different terminology for this
How about
category we're
community
talking about,
services?
that would be
That's fine.
appreciated.
That's fine.
The other thing I just wanted to add real quick is that there are some things, because we definitely heard because you brought this up at the town council, and we definitely heard that, and we did some brainstorming about that. I think adding a category, economic diversity, or diversity of businesses, or something along those lines. But additionally, there's other things that as a government entity that we can do to maybe loosen some regulations around specifically medically related facilities, allowing them in more places, giving more opportunities for people coming in. That is something that we could do.
Judith, that's where you come in, and I'd love to hear your suggestions on that, because I think we would embrace them immediately.
My only point is that that goal can be addressed in more than one way,
Yes, yes.
outside of just public benefit. So we're talking about, we have one conversation here, but we could have another
Absolutely.
conversation
I love
about
it.
other ways to
Love it.
attract and improve.
So Judith, we said something like, back to community service, accelerating and or providing community services as a guiding principle, number 4 on there. Then we took Jim's suggestion down below, and it sounds like both by site, or in other words, by location, that you're suggesting we could perhaps do some things that would allow things where they're not today in this category.
Right, but separate from the public benefit conversation.
Yeah.
That would
Okay,
be a
that's
code,
fine.
comp plan
Then we would just put
conversation.
some examples Jim's talking about down the product service subcategory that would tie back to the community services that Jim's saying he'd like to have as a guiding principle. That's what I heard. Is that what you heard?
Yes.
Okay. You good with that?
Yeah, beautiful.
You know, I think a community service benefit that I think we haven't talked about, but I think, to your point, Jim, as far as people getting in the cars and going to places, we have one grocery store on the island. Everyone that comes here, the 60,000 people during season, go to that grocery store
Yeah.
multiple
I think
times.
that's an excellent-
Corner
excellent point.
stores, I think, those are kind of, they're big in small communities, at least where I come from, they were big in small communities. If you needed something that was essential, you could go to this little corner store and not have to go. I would love to see some of those implemented somehow
I think
as
that-
a
that is
potentially
something.
unique benefit, or
And if you remember, and I know this is controversial, but the original Arches proposal
Yes.
actually had a little grocery store in there, and which, to your point, though, it may not be in that context, but I love that concept of having a grocery store, or at least a little storefront grocery, mid-island, northern island, so you can walk or take your bike.
And that
Back
can
in the day,
be-
There was one at Santini.
Yeah, that's right, Anita, that would be wonderful.
That can be congruent with like we talked about the restaurant debate on some of these developments. I know that there's a cafe or a breakfast place or something included in the original London Bay presentation I saw. So if they're hearing this, which I know they're in the audience today, those are the kind of things that a larger enhancement to that, providing that in the South End bingo, that steps the game up quite a bit. So I think it's a great, good conversation.
That means I'll never have to get my car. I love that, Chip. Yeah.
Okay. Judith? Sarah? Anything?
I'm curious if we have come up with definitions for all of these things, because I think that the definitions really help staff in determining if, when somebody comes forward with a proposal, if we don't have a list that we think is necessarily complete, do we have a way to define what a unique benefit is, what a special benefit is, what a public benefit is? And I think having some definitions would be very helpful for staff and potentially for council and LPA when somebody comes forward and says, this is a public benefit, and then you could read the definition and say, no, that's not, that's a special benefit, or that's an amenity for your clientele. But having that definition might be very helpful.
I know you always drive to that, and I could be way off base here, but I hope you drive them to us. And I'm not talking about in the formal session, in the pre-sessions, like I talked about before. I'd love that to be a dynamic conversation, to come back to us then through you, to say, here's what we're adding as a result of the feedback we got from the joint meetings with whomever. I just think definitions are wonderful for guiding and directing. They also limit creativity and spontaneity of what people say, okay, I got it, I'm gonna do it differently. So somewhere between there, I'm always gonna advocate for, because I think the ability of people to do things that we don't demand or respect or expect specifically are the best ones, because they're gonna wanna do them enthusiastically, and they may be better than what we offer.
And that's why I wanted a definition rather than a specific list, because if it kind of fits into the general scheme
I
of
see.
the concept.
So
because
Sarah?
they may want to sort of make up their mind
I
about
see,
what they're
okay.
able to give before they get to the point where they feel like they have something to come forward with.
Well, Judith took a stab at defining these in her November
did.
7th.
And are you comfortable with that? Do you think that that hit the nail on the
If you want a
head?
definition, we should probably look at those.
I think we've discussed we've discussed public benefits, special benefits, and amenities quite a bit. I think we could make a general
Blend those two conversations, Jeff.
Okay. And I
definition
apologize
of what we,
because I
or
missed the
the
beginning.
No, don't
conditions.
apologize.
Or at least we could set the conditions of a public benefit.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about perpetuity, we talked about actual public access.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about some definitions of amenities,
Okay.
a restaurant, but, that's like co-benefits the developer and the community.
What the heck?
Excuse me?
That scared me.
Scared me too.
Were you gonna
So
say
I think you
something,
could, I think you could take what we've talked about today and draft up something, and we could check it over, we could look at it, but I think
And
we've
do you feel
covered
like
that pretty well.
So the public benefit and special benefit are the same.
No,
No,
I can't
Well, that
touch that.
was.
don't touch it, John.
Here.
But you can still talk.
It seems to be live. I think if I could give you some clarification of what I understand we came around. Public benefit was something that was available to all public in perpetuity. Now I'm gonna take a step out further than what I heard was consensus at no additional cost. A special benefit would apply to a subset of the population and may or may not include some commercial aspect, which is a benefit to the developer as well as benefit to the residents.
That's fair.
And then amenity,
And an amenity is something that's available to the people that
part of
are.
what would be there
it would be
anyway.
nice to have.
For
Yeah.
example.
So just to be clear, the reason there's two different definitions is that the development agreement calls for the special benefits. It does not call for public benefits. The public benefit is
that's
what's
being
called
changed.
for in the CPD. But
Needs
we're
to-
changing
We
that.
are changing that, and the question I have is,
I think you need to have special, what else we got there?
Public.
Special, public, unique, and amenity. Because unique, I think, is a very important one up there too, because what's unique to the south end may not be unique to the north end.
And that's in the guiding principles, which
Yeah.
fits very
Exactly.
nicely to the whole
That's
document.
location-based.
It is location-based, yes it is.
So here's another question, regarding development agreements. We've said that, you know, in the conversation earlier, we said that development agreements may make sense for some smaller developments too. A lot of those smaller developments may be unique. They may be building back a business that people want, but it may be difficult for them to provide what we would consider to be like sort of an above and beyond benefit because they're small, because they're, you know, struggling to get back into to be part of the community. So we don't want to put anything in that would prevent those people from accessing the ability to do that type of development. I mean, do you agree?
I think it
And
just
how do
by
we-
having unique in there, to your point, it gives decision makers at the time the ability to use that and not necessarily something that's a special benefit. It gives you that extra bucket or that extra tool in the toolbox to be able to say, we understand that you can't provide, you know, beach access. We understand you can't provide a public restroom, but you can provide the uniqueness in this benefit, whether it be a return of a business that was here before Ian or something along those lines, that could be weighed in as a public benefit.
Or at some
something
point
like-
where when we have a what did I write down? A community partnership fund aside from our impact fees. That business or that property could also contribute. There could be contribution to that for things like a resiliency plan or a seawall or a monorail or whatever somebody decides they want at that particular moment. Now, remember, that was a plan earlier.
I know.
So Sarah, do you need more than, I mean, I'm looking back to the original straw man here, unique in its nature or physical location. Doesn't that capture what you're trying to do, the smaller approaches?
Everyone thinks their project is unique.
And they are.
Good, then make their case.
Well, and that, so giving them some sort of a criteria, whether it's architectural, whether it's landscaping, whether it's a unique product, a unique service, experience, maybe location. I mean, and I think that is open to interpretation, which is positive.
Should be, yeah.
But I have to tell you, everybody thinks what they're doing is unique, even if that's a box, guys. That's a box. That's not unique. That's so, you know, having some way that you can judge it, because you'll want criteria when it comes before you. You'll want to be able to say, yeah, this is kind of what we wanted, or no, and have a way to say no. So that's pretty important too. Having criteria that you can either say, yeah, we think they met it, or that we think they did not meet it.
But Sarah, that word unique, I like Jim's idea of, okay, your project's unique, tell me why, because your project's unique, tell the person who's sitting here 5 years from now why. It's gonna be a different pitch.
Yeah.
We won't be in bizarro land, as Jim said, you know, then, and so it will be different. So I don't know that I want to, quantify unique. Unique in its nature is going to be something that the developer or business has to compel us to believe. I don't know.
Could we somehow capture the ill-defined but understood vibe, contribute to the, what's the right word? The eclectic culture and nature of Fort Myers Beach, or something like that captures, it's funky, and we're gonna like funky to a certain extent. I'm kind of struggling, but you know what I'm saying? Now we're getting to aspirational of what are we trying to retain on this island? What are we trying to protect on this island? Maybe that gives us a little something.
To spin off of what Patrick was saying, how are we gonna build our pirate
We
ship
want
for all the
pirates.
pirates? Yes.
You know,
And
I
I
would,
think-
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, and I think that just some little details will help, because also we don't want people, I mean, people are spending a lot of money to get a development to you.
Right.
And cause they're hiring architects and surveyors and engineers, and everybody is involved in this. So by the time it gets to you, if they didn't hit it, and they get all the way to LPA or town council before they realize they didn't hit it, it's cost a lot of money and a lot of time. So, and because you guys do want development to happen, you know, how do we make sure that we make this as clear as possible so that people have a vision, have your vision when they're moving forward and not spinning their wheels, not wasting their money
You know,
and slowing down the
speaking of
process.
spinning wheels, it kind of goes into the analogy that I've been thinking about a lot, because a lot of us, and I thought about a Jeep because I'm a Jeep guy. A Jeep has always been a Jeep. Fort Myers Beach has always been Fort Myers Beach. It may have different iterations. We're now in a different iteration of what that island/Jeep would look like, but you still can take the top off. You can still take the doors off. You can still be funky and fun. May have a bigger engine, may be lifted, may have better brakes, may have better emissions, but the island, and maybe that's a bad analogy, or if you're a Corvette guy, a Corvette's always been a Corvette. It's been a fast car, right? I mean, Fort Myers Beach to me is like a car. I always go back to car analogies because it makes sense to me. And we're in a different iteration of what we were when you were in high school here, right? Or when you went to school here. We're just in a different iteration of what Fort Myers Beach is. And how do you keep that same generality, is that a word?
You nurture the community. You nurture the community, and you set a level of expectations that they feel comfortable with, so that they know they are going to redo their house for the 5th time or the 3rd time or whatever, and they keep doubling down and doubling down. It's like, not to bring up my store again, but you know, people come in and they go, "Oh my gosh, isn't this bigger?" And I said, "Yes, it's twice the size." I doubled down on the insanity. I literally doubled it. And so, was that a smart idea or was it pure craziness? Time will tell. But I think you have to, in doing that, you have to let people know that they can have faith in what's happening here.
Anita, you had asked if the people have to run the place, Andy and Frankie, have any reaction or feedback to what we're doing?
Yeah, I've been waiting for one of them to get up, but they haven't.
No
Be
pressure,
be
guys.
fun to hear about the people that ultimately have to.
Do you have any reaction? Not to put you on the spot there, but
No pressure.
here,
We're running out of them around here.
Andy, here, have this one.
Sorry, I was,
Maybe we need an audio fund.
There we
Oh,
go.
no, Jason just brought you one.
that's an ongoing fund.
That's true.
Definitely need an audio fund.
We are in the process of renovating a new building, so we don't have to have this problem. So we do have an audio fund. It's coming. Patience. Patience, that's all we ask,
That's what he's gonna
okay?
contribute.
No,
Okay? That's what we need.
That's a big.
One thing they brought me here to do is put the island back the way it was. Traffic, that was a good point you made. I had not heard that you had traffic in 1977.
There was traffic in 1952.
That was related to today.
Yes.
So if they haven't been able to solve it in 50 years,
not
you're gonna solve it in 2 weeks? I'm gonna solve it in 18 months? It's not gonna be solved. Get that off the list. We've gotta live with it.
Don't take it off the list.
No, I don't mean it
We
that
gotta
way.
keep trying,
I mean
yeah.
today. I mean today, because it's like, we continually work to improve the traffic. They're working now to improve the traffic. There's a lot of money being put in. So basically you brought me here to do this. So one thing we're doing is trying to return the town to where the stormwater works, where the sewer works, where you turn the water on, the water comes. We're working on tanks. We're working on things that are infrastructural things. What I want you to do is, when you decide on what you do with your impact fees, don't make them so precise that it can't be something we don't know hasn't been developed or come down the pipe yet that we can't spend the money on. Don't limit ourselves by a building fund. And Judith and I worked places before together, and we had a building fund where you paid the impact fees, were paid into the building fund. It could only be used for the building fund. Couldn't do anything else with it. Let's don't limit our vision by the impact. We've talked about a transportation fund for months and talked about how that's important. And when you come in, if you talk about parking, I agree. Parking can just take care of itself. It will. It always has, always will. I've created more parking in other towns. They fill up and they still want more parking. So it will take care of itself. It really will.
Yeah.
But if you put the money into a fund that covers the seawall, that covers the resiliency, that covers everything that we can think of today, then our hands aren't tied going forward. So that's something I want you to really be mindful of. The strategic plan, it's not mine, by the way. It's the
Oh, no, I know
town's.
it's not yours,
It's
yes.
not Andy's strategic plan, so we're working on that. We've got our newest employee here to help drive our strategic plan, so Tracy Kohler's here to basically, that's one of her objectives, is to get that off the ground and going further than we have. Jason's been working on that. So we're working on those. And all of this does drive together. I mean, obviously, if you don't have, and Karen and I have talked a lot about strategic planning in it, and if your strategic plan is not in place, then it's really hard to direct people on which way to go.
No
What's on,
compass.
who's on first base,
No
who's
compass.
on second. That's really a difficult situation. So we're really, that's near and dear to me too. So we're really trying to get that off the ground. Been working with, I can't remember her name. What's her name? Jason and Angela, with the University of South Florida. She's with a government association there that does strategic plans. So we're working on that. So we'll be coming back together more and more over the next 3 to 5 months, doing these kind of things as we continue to plan strategically. How do we offer better protection from storms? If we want to attract people, we want to offer benefits. Something we need to offer developers is protections from the storm. We got another one next week. I was just looking at an email, starting to prepare for next week. That gets a little tiring. You know, we don't want to talk about it again, but we have to talk about it again. And we just get streets cleaned up, and it's been, you know, the last couple of months we've really been, chasing our tail about this. But, you know, we're talking about moving pipes again, and how Dan and I were talking about this morning. How can we better help secure our beach a little bit, and things like that. So again, I think that's one of the focuses I take out of this. I'm not, educate a lot of smart people in this room, by the way, and I'm very impressed, and I love to hear the knowledge and the information that you present. Our planners have equal knowledge and experience, and they can offer us a lot. And I think the one thing is those impact fees, near and dear to every community. I think Dan and I have talked so much about them. You know, we know they go to the county. The county gets a lot of the impact fees. We've kind of been on the short end of the stick for a lot of years. We need to kind of flip that narrative.
Absolutely.
But let's not restrict it as much as other communities I've seen do that before. I know Bal Harbor is a good community that has already put an ordinance in place that the impact fees go to a general type fund. So that's the kind of thing we need to focus on as we go forward, is how we can
I like it.
use those funds to help development. There could be various ways that we haven't even imagined happening yet that are coming down the road. What do we need money for? The monorail, I've heard that,
I love it. Canals, dredging.
Canal dredging. I mean,
Lately, it's
exactly.
been
How do
storm
we do it? But storm prep, I think that, right, Dan, that's got to be at the top of the list. And I think it's, working with FEMA, how do we use it in matching grants? How do we do things? Because there's always going to be a cost involved. But I appreciate the conversation. It's very, very insightful.
Thank you, Andy.
I'll just add two really brief comments. One is staff is here as clay. So we are moldable to what your decisions are, or what your guidelines are. We have the future of the town to rebuild, but we can only do that with guidance. So we just came through this growing pain of a development agreement, very first one. And personally, I thought between a lot of the people sitting here, we knocked it out of the park for what the guidelines that were given to us and the challenges on both sides, the developer and the town. And we went back, and it was a lot of give and take over a long period of time to get an agreement. Right or wrong, acceptable or not, it was jointly achieved by staff and the developer. To me, those are baby steps. We knew that this was going to be the first one. We knew that this is the growing pains thing. And it was very awkward for both sides. But it taught both sides a lot. On the developer side, the comments have been made correctly. They're not coming in here blindly. Doing with government for 40 years, they know what they can get and what they can't get. And they always start low because they think that you're going to kind of go in low with low aspirations. I don't think that this was the case in this particular arena, but for staff, just having some type of benchmark to go for. We now have it. We now know what we hit our knees on and what we didn't. So going forward, any type of guidance that we can get from a governing board to put into policy helps us greatly. And I appreciate all your time and all your input. And I loved your documents. I think that's what we need. That's what we need going forward is that kind of a guideline. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, so, where would you like to go from here? I mean, I think we've done a good job at kind of fleshing out what we think public benefits are, and what special benefits are, and what an amenity is. Do you all agree?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Do you agree, Judith? No, you don't agree. I can tell by the look on your face. So what would you like clarification on?
Just when I wrote a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 contributes to the eclectic character of Fort Myers Beach. You're comfortable with that statement? What Sarah was saying earlier, because I've been thinking about this, is when you're negotiating with somebody,
How do you quantify
it's
that?
preferable to be in a position of strength. When the developer comes in and there's no, when they're told, okay, well, they can offer this basket of different types of benefits, they're gonna put whatever they think is appropriate in there. And then you're asking for more, and then you'll say, well, you know, we want more, but they've made the starting off, they've set the price. And then you're kind of coming at it from the edges. Well, if they come in with 10 stories and you don't feel the benefits equal that, are you gonna say, only 8 stories is worth what's happening here? I think if you think about this character and what you really are looking for, the developer can work on that ahead of time, and then you're coming in and you say, we've said this, and it's clear you're not doing this, and so we need more. So I feel like that would be more of a position of negotiating, you know what I'm trying to get at, from like a position of strength. So you come in and you say, this is we want this. We want unique architecture that's typical of Southwest Florida or the islands kind of character. That's what we want. And then the developer comes in and says, we don't like that. We like modern architecture, and that's what we want to build. Well, then you can decide whether that's okay with you, or you're looking at that and you're saying, doesn't need it. We're good. We're not going to take this. And then they've got to come back to the drawing board. You can always, I think, in thinking about this, say, or like, or inclusive of, what's the lawyer word, including but not limited to, right? Correct. But putting some parameters out there, especially if you have an idea of what you want, if you want that kind of, Key West, island kind of look, it might be helpful to say that. And then they're gonna give you that. Unless they've got some whole other, idea, and then they'll try to pitch you, but then you're at a position of strength saying, that's not what we said, we're not gonna do that. But you can always, if you've got inclusive language in there, work with them if you feel like it's necessary. But if the character, and I think that was a point that Patrick made, whether that was yesterday or before, I forget, but he was saying, in the comp plan, it says, is it compatible? Well, you can always say it's not compatible and we're denied. You don't like it, it's not compatible. And you don't have to go any further than that. But then you're not really gonna get what it is that you want.
Exactly.
That's right.
And some communities,
Gotta give 'em direction.
some communities don't want development. They don't want it, and then that's really easy to explain to people. You gotta come in and you gotta do exactly what's in the code because they don't really want anything new, so you gotta make it, word for word what's in the code. But this is a community, from what I'm hearing, that is open to new ideas as long as it's compatible with that character. So in this comp plan visioning, maybe it's not today, but
Yes, I think it's in the visioning.
thinking about what that eclectic character is, and I think you all have an idea of what that is, but kind of coming to like a general consensus that doesn't necessarily limit you, but at least provides that guidance. So you're starting at a point of, we've said this is what we're looking for.
That's great, and I agree, because I think ages ago we said, it's easy to, we've always told people, here are the rules, this is what we don't want, but we never said what we did want. And that's what we need to be doing right now. That's what we need to be doing right now.
Madam Chair, parliamentary inquiry of sorts, and I know we've gone 2 hours, but just a quick question. I thought the discussion yesterday was excellent, and one of the things that came up, and I just, as we're all together, I thought you raised a very interesting concern about the applicant feeling the need to build and develop the record to the point where their presentation becomes 2 hours long. I wonder, Nancy, is it possible for them to submit their proposal and/or PowerPoint into the record without formally verbalizing it, so we don't have to, so it leaves more times for questions, inquiries? I'm much more interested in the LPA's questions of the applicant. I've reviewed their proposal. I don't need to hear them verbalize it. Hitting the highlights is fine because it's great for the public, but can you comment on that?
Yes, is it on?
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. So establishing the record is very, very important. Oftentimes when we follow a script, right, in a lot of our quasi-judicial proceedings. There is a question sometimes that's asked, first of all, have you seen the agenda materials? Oftentimes we could ask, is there a motion to incorporate the PowerPoint or the information that they're bringing into the record? And that motion could be made and hopefully approved. Then they have it in the record and they don't necessarily have to go through the entire thing. Some communities do that as standard protocol. So everything they bring is automatically in the record.
I think that's what you were getting at, weren't you, Jim? I mean,
I love that.
And then
yeah.
just kind of do some highlights of,
Yes.
we've submitted this packet, this PowerPoint. We just want to draw your attention to page 7. On page 7, you'll see blah, blah, blah. On page 24, you'll see
It
this.
gets to the point where the applicant feels like they have to read every single point, even the minutia of their PowerPoint, somehow to get it into the record.
glad you brought
When
that.
I'd much rather be hearing LPAs peppering them with
So,
questions.
so as part of the quote housekeeping things that we do at the onset of our quasi-judicial proceedings, we can have that question,
that
we
into
can
the
make that
script,
motion.
for sure.
That would give them some assurance.
That's great.
It
Thank you.
also gives me a little
I'll
of
just say
assurance.
3 hours, thanks.
But
I
what about?
prefer that over a time limit, because I think
Yeah.
that's more organic.
Yeah, but what about getting that, so we do it in the meeting, that doesn't give us the opportunity to review it prior to the meeting.
oh, no, it
Oh,
would be,
no,
it
no,
would be in
we'd
the
still
packet.
have that.
But that was
Oh,
also
it would be in the
discussed,
packet, okay.
as far
okay.
as presenting new ideas and new concepts or proposals during the meeting. The idea of having an automatic continuance if you submitted significant changes after the time that the agenda went out, that it would automatically be a continuance. But I think, as I pointed out, maybe I don't know if it was a private conversation or during the meeting, but sometimes things happen during the meeting and you learn new things and you want to make that change. So you may not want an absolute rule that if it's after the agenda going out, it's an automatic continuance. Give yourself a little bit of discretion, because maybe it's something that, yeah, it's a little bit of a change, but it shouldn't hold this project up.
But I think, to Karen's point, the magnitude of that deck yesterday, that we weren't afforded time to review in advance to go through. It'd be hard for me to allow that to be read into the record with no notice or
Right.
opportunity to have questions like we do around it. So we have to be very clear to the applicant that we would consider that a significant add at the end, and we don't want that to occur. What you're going to present, the multitude and magnitude of it, needs to be in the package ahead of time within the timeframes we've agreed, or it's not going to be included in the testimony.
Or I don't know that you should exclude it from the testimony, but I think what you could do is put out there the risk of having a motion to continue because of the significant information that you've just been provided. And honestly, as a quasi-judicial decision maker, the expectation is there that you have read all your agenda materials and that you're knowledgeable of it and you are prepared.
And Nancy, just for the record, I was just referring to the Neptune example. The pink shell was a different dynamic and a different set of challenges, but the Neptune one, I just felt that the applicant felt the need, and I in my previous life, there's few things more painful than seeing someone with an extensive PowerPoint who feels like they have to read everything in the PowerPoint when obviously they could hit 10,000 feet and then just allow more time for Q&A and exchange back and forth. So it's the Neptune that I was referencing, but the pink shell raised its own set of concerns. But yeah, so it's the fact that they could submit that in the record, still hit the high points, for the public. I think that's really important, but there's such granularity in there that just wasn't.
Right, but as a decision maker, you may not feel comfortable. You may want to take that extra time to go through that document.
That's fine too. That would be the choice, the
discretion.
discretion of the LPA and or the
Right.
council. Yep.
Yes.
I think it does, another thing that has always frustrated me, and it's happened a few times over the last few years, is you made a point about it allows you the opportunity to say, the door to be open for a motion to continue. It goes for me even a step further. I've talked to several LPA members that have voted one way on a project, only to see once that project goes to the council, it has significantly changed, or more information has been put in. That, it should go back for review because it maybe would change, right? So I think that gives us a little bit of I don't want to say fence, but almost something that we can push back on and say, listen,
Yes.
you're expecting us to look at something in good faith. You have to provide us with good faith. And if you're going to show the LPA one thing and then show the council something different, and if we don't see it until the day of, to your point, Jim, it becomes very difficult and it's unfair to the residents and the policymakers, quite honestly, to vote on something that they didn't clearly get a chance to see.
Well, and to the staff that, in the meeting that we had, have gone to great lengths to make sure that we have everything in advance that we can prepare for, so it's not fair to them either.
So the LPA, their primary task under Florida law is to make a finding of consistency, that the proposal that's come before them is consistent with your comp plan. Then they make a recommendation to you. Included in that recommendation is whether or not the project is consistent, but then at the council level, you also make a determination on consistency. And then there's a separate cause of action to challenge a decision for consistency in and of itself. So I try to watch what you're doing and make sure that we make those findings and that it's in our ordinance and you know, as we move forward. But once it comes to council, and if it is perceived as a different project than what was recommended as being consistent by the LPA, clearly within your discretion to send it back.
Yeah,
If
they
not,
can
if
remand
not
it.
your obligation, I mean, if it's a totally different project.
And one last thing, can we expand that to presentations also? It's drove me crazy since being on the LPA till now. Someone comes in for a presentation on whatever it is, and we don't see the presentation until they're actually giving it
Right.
here.
And then
And now
they
you're
ask you
flaring
to
for hours
rule on
asking
it or something,
questions. Or they're asking us to give, be on their side or give them a recommendation and we haven't had a chance to see it until it's here, or the public hasn't had a chance to see it. So personally, I've been asking for years to be able to see presentations in our packet ahead of time, whether it's the MPO or whether it's whatever, so that we can have our notes ready to go. We're not just reacting to what we see ahead of time.
So the way other communities I have seen that handled is a time limitation on the presentation itself. I've seen as little as 20 minutes, 30 minutes by the applicant property owner. And then if there is a need to extend that period of time, someone will make a motion and say, I would like to make a motion to give so-and-so,
But I think
20
Dan's
more
referring
minutes.
to an outside agency or
Right.
Sam from the We Love Kittens
So
Society.
if they bring a 100-page presentation for the first time that they're intending to show you, that's gonna eat up their entire time period that's allocated. So that's kind of a message that could be sent as far as your procedures, how much time they're gonna get. Again, 100, slide PowerPoint is gonna eat up that time they have to present. So just food for thought.
Kind of got off the rails there a little bit, didn't we?
I think it was good though, that was good. Okay, so anything else from anyone else?
Do you want to have her scroll up on her, there's more on your cheat sheet that you have, Judith, isn't there?
I think the top portion is the main thing that you've kind of built consensus on
Yeah.
today. It sounds like the next step maybe is not to adjust the code now, but to go through the comp plan visioning
Yes.
process first. But at least we have some guidelines of what you're looking for. But I think this would eventually lead to an ordinance that would adjust the land development code.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, everybody's nodding your heads?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Tracy, I sure am glad that you're here with this. Yeah, very, very glad indeed. Okay, anything from anyone else? Thank you all for this joint meeting. It
Public
is
comment?
10, we don't have it
I thought
on
we
the,
talked about it.
would you like to
Yeah.
have public comment?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
certainly can't
David,
hurt.
anybody? Sure. But,
Yeah, I think I inundated everybody with emails the last couple of days. I would just agree with what she
Your
was-
name for the record?
My name
Dave.
is Dave Lay, 1920 Bayview Drive. I watched completely the Neptune presentation yesterday. My wife and I are 100% in agreement with it. It was a great presentation, excellent product. It's not overly high. I don't believe there was any pushback by the residents about it. I
There
think
wasn't.
that process was perfect from beginning to end. Apparently, they had community meetings. That's what all developments seem to be. And if we're only gonna have 4 more big developments, it should be duplicating that process. I don't know why they didn't initially come in with a 10-story tower. They could have, but they didn't. But what was accepted and nobody pushed back on was the 4 stories over 2 stories of parking. That was perfect. So I think we need to stay with that. The other thing I mentioned to Jim earlier is that the Chamber of Commerce, we need to have metrics provided to the town as to how many heads and beds we need to have here.
Well, she has those.
We need to have those so
What
that
was-
everybody can use as a basis from which to make decisions. Because what was talked about in the presentation yesterday was the financial impact and maybe the amenity impacts of that project. And that is really the big criteria of what is gonna make that project fly or not. I raised it up earlier to the notes I sent you, was that we are maybe not taking into consideration the number of people that need to visit this island to support the restaurants and the retail establishments
That's
and
right.
the doctors and everything else that we want to do. I don't see any metrics on that at all. And I've never been presented, but you can make a big argument that the Seagate Plaza or Seagate presentation with only 120 units, 3,000 square feet, how many heads and beds is that going to represent? It was replacing Red Coconut, which had how many units? Now, we're diminishing the number of people who are gonna pay for restaurants and retail establishments by the number of units that you've approved and you're one vote away from. So I'm really concerned about that. I think we need to really flesh out the financial impacts of Seagate and any other future project and resist just saying that low intensity is the answer. Because then that's a case where, how, who's gonna buy a 3,000 square foot? Are they expecting to have, 3-star restaurants and that sort of thing moving forward? We don't have those. We have maybe 1 or 2. That's it. So, I think I sent you a note. You should all get it about what I think are criteria that's important on the island. And even though public benefits are an issue, the big issue is the financial impact.
David, thanks for your
Thank you.
continued
Dave.
involvement. I appreciate it very much. Please?
Good morning, Mayor, Town Council, LPA, and staff. If you don't know, I'm Chris Smuts with London Bay Development Group. We own the Outrigger, Charlie, Sandpiper, and Grandview at Bay Beach. We greatly appreciate your dedication to Fort Myers Beach and your commitment to building back a more resilient community. We are encouraged by your efforts to provide clarity about public benefit and special benefits related to the development on the island. This topic has been at the forefront of conversations about the future of Fort Myers Beach, particularly as it relates to large-scale developments like those being proposed by London Bay and others. We support your recommendations to include such items as right-of-way landscaping, view corridors, beach access points, participation in multimodal transportation, public art, and more. In fact, we've included many of these in some of our conceptual plans for future projects. We strongly urge you to consider the inclusion of essential services as well. In an island that has been devastated by a hurricane plus 2 more hits this year, the view on public benefit should be viewed in a very different light compared to previously. As we have brought together South residents, leaders, and focus groups, we have heard loud and clear that restaurants, bars, and places to meet and hang out with friends are the most important public benefit we can offer. And based on the conversation today, we agree not to count the area below habitable towards FAR. It has been 2 years since Hurricane Ian, and the island continues to struggle to return to the thriving community it once was. Once the vibrant south end of the island, where properties are located, residents still lack basic amenities, where they can gather over a meal, cup of coffee, or a cocktail with friends at sunset. These businesses provide a vital public service to the community, not only enriching the lives of nearby residents, but also resulting in a cascading positive economic impact for the island. As you move forward with your discussions, we ask you to consider long-term economic viability of Fort Myers Beach, including essential services such as retails or restaurants as part of public benefit or special or unique public benefits, to not only encourage the development community, but also to think about how they can innovatively support the island's recovery, but also bring the support, the economy in the long run. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to say anything? Tracy, you got anything? Any ideas? Anything you heard? No? All good. Okay. All right, thank you all very much. Anything else from anybody? Hearing nothing?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, it's 10:56 a.m.